On June 29, 2008, in the town of Abita Springs, St. Tammany Parish, Louisiana, the emergency dispatch center received a call at 5:51 a.m. The caller, claiming to be the husband, reported that he had returned home after a night shift and found his wife unresponsive. Officers from the local police department, along with paramedics, were dispatched to a residence on Watts Road in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Upon entering the home, they found a woman lying lifeless in the entryway. Medical personnel pronounced her dead before the police had fully assessed the scene. A close-range gunshot wound was visible at the back of her head, and a 9mm shell casing lay nearby. This marked the beginning of an investigation. Once the victim was identified, investigators began examining her background. The victim, Krista N. Baker Alexander, was born on November 27, 1983, in Laurel, Mississippi, and raised in a devout family. Her father, Winfred Baker, was a pastor. Her mother, Patsy Ann Bissell Baker, supported his ministry. Krista was the youngest of 3 children, with 2 older brothers. In 1991, the family moved to Abita Springs, Louisiana, where Krista's parents established their own church and missionary outreach programs. From a young age, Krista actively participated in congregational life, assisting with youth programs, organizing gatherings, later accompanying her parents on both domestic and international missionary trips. After completing homeschooling, she enrolled in an online Christian education program at the Tennessee Bible Institute. Alongside her studies, Krista remained actively involved in missionary work, participating in 17 trips, primarily focused on helping young children. Those who knew her described her as calm, composed, and consistently placing the needs of others above her own. She was deeply engaged in church activities, organizing youth meetings, preparing Sunday services, and supporting charitable projects. Raised in a family that valued discipline, morality, Krista held strong religious convictions. She spoke openly about the importance of abstinence until marriage and believed that relationships should be founded on the goal of starting a family. Despite her faith-driven lifestyle, Krista was sociable and maintained many friendships, while keeping her personal life clearly separate from her spiritual values. Friends recalled her expressing a desire to start a family, but noted that she was not in a rush, preferring to wait until she was spiritually ready. Dreams of a home and children always came after her faith, which remained her top priority. These details painted a portrait of a young woman who had grown up in a rigorous religious environment, deeply devoted to her family, church, and living a life grounded in honesty, disciplina. Krista met Cowdy Alexander at church, where he regularly attended youth gatherings. Both were active in the congregation, Krista leading programs for younger members, Cowdy assisting in organizing trips and events. Initially, their interactions were limited to church duties and missionary work, but over time, a bond of trust developed between them. Krista viewed Cowdy as someone who shared her beliefs and commitment to faith. He appeared attentive, calm, reliable. Her parents, Winfred and Patsy, knew Cowdy and held a positive opinion of him. Their families were friendly, and no one questioned the beginnings of the relationship. Cowdy, a year younger than Krista, was training to become a paramedic and completing his education with a local emergency services unit. Despite his busy schedule, he remained involved in church programs, earning respect in a community where service was central to life. Their relationship grew gradually, in line with their church's values. Traditions were important, and they both maintained boundaries until marriage. Friends remembered Krista saying she wanted her first kiss to be on her wedding day. After years of friendship, Cowdy approached Krista's father to ask for permission to propose. Winfred gave his blessing, recognizing in the young man someone who shared the family's values. The engagement was modest, without any public attention. Wedding preparations took several months. During that time, Krista continued volunteering at church while planning their future together. Cowdy was finishing his paramedic training and finalizing employment with the local emergency response team. On March 1, 2008, They were married in the church her parents had built. The ceremony was attended by family, fellow parishioners, and close friends. For Krista, it was the realization of a lifelong dream to build a family rooted in faith, love, and mutual respect. Those who attended described the wedding as simple yet deeply moving. The couple appeared genuinely happy. After the ceremony, they moved into a rented home not far from the church, ready to begin their life together. Krista took Cootie's last name. Friends and relatives recalled how serene and confident she seemed in the months that followed, often speaking about their plans for the future, dreams of starting a family and serving the community alongside her husband. It appeared she had found the life she had always envisioned. But just 4 months later, that same home would become the center of one of the most shocking investigations in St. from the Great Tammany Parish. After the initial response, crime scene specialists meticulously documented every detail. Krista's body was found lying face down. Forensic experts identified a single gunshot wound to the back of her head. The characteristics of the injury indicated a close-range shot with visible soot and skin burns surrounding the entry point. Death had been instantaneous. A single 9mm shell casing was located near the body, but no firearm was found in the house. Investigators, along with a crime scene photographer and a ballistics expert, examined the residence and filed their reports. There were no signs of a struggle. Everything appeared almost undisturbed. The kitchen was spotless, dishes cleaned, surfaces clear. The bedroom showed no trace of disorder. The bed was neatly made. However, the living room told a different story. Drawers were left open, boxes overturned, and a jewelry box lay empty on the bed. Oddly, nothing of true value was missing. Gold jewelry, cash, electronics remained untouched. Krista's purse sat on the kitchen table with her money and bank cards still inside. Investigators quickly spotted the inconsistency. A house that appeared ransacked, yet no missing valuables. The locks were intact, the windows closed, and there were no pry marks or unfamiliar shoe prints. Only those belonging to the couple. Officers canvassed the neighborhood. No one reported hearing a gunshot or signs of a struggle. One neighbor mentioned not seeing any unfamiliar vehicles that night. By this stage, investigators had only one confirmed fact. The emergency call came from the victim's husband. His presence at the scene was explained by his return from a night shift, yet aspects of his account immediately raised suspicions. Detectives turned their attention to Krista's husband. Cowdy Alexander, 24, was a paramedic employed by Acadian Ambulance Service. On the night of June 28-29, he had been scheduled for duty. Shift logs and his co-workers confirmed his presence at work. During the initial interview, Cowdy stated that he left home around 5:00 p.m. The night, he said, had been relatively uneventful, with only a few emergency calls. He claimed to have texted and called Krista several times, but she hadn't replied. Assuming she had gone to bed early, he finished his shift and drove home the next morning. Upon arrival, he said he found the front door slightly ajar. The house in disarray. That was when he discovered his wife's body in the entryway. After checking for a pulse and realizing she was gone, he called emergency services. Throughout questioning, Cowdy remained composed, his emotions carefully contained. Investigators took note of his restraint, an unusual reaction for someone who had just lost a loved one. He mentioned that 2 firearms, a rifle and a shotgun, were missing from their gun cabinet, along with a DVD player. However, valuables such as jewelry and cash had been left untouched. His alibi seemed solid. Records confirmed that he had been on duty during the night. Yet, doubts lingered. No charges were filed, and there was no concrete evidence directly implicating him. Still, detectives weren't ready to dismiss their suspicions. They decided to scrutinize his statements and verify every detail against the physical evidence collected at the scene. While investigators continued to confirm Cowdy's timeline, the case took a new turn when a neighbor, 69-year-old Mavis Rabelais, came forward. She reported seeing Cowdy in his backyard the afternoon before Krista's death, firing a handgun toward the pond behind the house. According to her, he appeared to be shooting at turtles. and the sound of the gunfire was loud enough to hear from her porch. The following day, a forensic team combed the area near the pond behind the Cowdy's property. Several 9mm shell casings were recovered from the grass and along the water's edge. These items were sent to the state crime lab for comparison with the casing found beside Krista's body. When the results came back, they were unmistakable. The markings on the primer and ejection pattern were identical. All the bullets had been fired from the same weapon. The gun Cowdy had used for target practice the day before was the same firearm that had ended Krista's life. Confronted with the evidence, Cowdy altered his story. In a second interview, he claimed that the handgun had been sold the previous night to a man named Steve, around 35 years old, white, of average build. He said the transaction occurred right in front of his home, where Steve supposedly paid him $500 in cash. When asked for further details, Cowdy could provide none. He couldn't remember the buyer's last name, offered only a vague description of an older pickup truck, maybe a Toyota, and admitted that he hadn't written down a license plate number. There were no witnesses, no paperwork, and no surveillance footage to support his claim. Investigators canvassed the neighborhood, local repair shops, and firearm dealers, but no one fitting that description was ever found. With the physical evidence pointing toward Cowdy, investigators began probing deeper into the couple's private life. The first interviews were conducted with Krista's parents, Winfred and Patsy Baker. Krista had been 17 weeks pregnant at the time of her death. The pregnancy had been progressing normally, but in recent weeks, she had seemed increasingly anxious. According to Patsy, Krista confided that Cowdy had become distant and irritable, refusing to talk about the baby or their future. This emotional withdrawal mirrored the stoic demeanor investigators had witnessed after the incident, suggesting that the strain between them had begun long before the tragedy. Patsy also disclosed that 2 months before her death, Krista had suspected Cowdy of being unfaithful. She never identified who the other woman might be, but believed it could have been one of his co-workers from the ambulance service. Krista had noticed him staying late after shifts and coming home with vague explanations. Confronted with the evidence, Cowdy altered his story. In a second interview, Cowdy was earning just $11 an hour as a paramedic for Acadian Ambulance Service. To qualify for a promotion, he needed to pass a national certification exam, but he failed on his first attempt. Retaking it required a fee the couple couldn't afford. At the time, Krista was not employed, and their household relied entirely on Cowdy's modest income. Her parents had offered financial help more than once, but Cowdy refused each time, insisting it was his duty to provide for his family. In the months leading up to the tragedy, Krista began calling her parents more frequently, something she rarely did before. Winfred recalled that she often sought advice on how to encourage her husband without triggering an argument. To investigators, these accounts painted a picture of a household strained by stress and unspoken tension. Cowdy, weighed down by financial struggles, marital discord, and growing emotional distance, the investigation soon expanded beyond the crime scene. Police summarized the situation in their notes: a 17-week pregnancy, a troubled marriage, possible infidelity, and financial hardship. The next step was clear. They needed to verify whether the woman Krista had suspected actually existed, and, if so, what role she might have played in the events leading to Krista's death. Their focus turned to Cowdy's workplace. Interviews with his co-workers revealed that he was unusually close with a fellow paramedic, 26-year-old Allison Sharp. When questioned, Sharp did not deny the relationship. She admitted that her involvement with Cowdy continued even after his marriage to Krista. According to her, their connection began long before the wedding, and Cowdy frequently expressed doubts about his feelings for his fiancée. Sharp told investigators that they would meet during, after shifts, sometimes staying in hotels together. Sharp said she knew he was married but believed he was struggling emotionally and trying to sort out his life. He never mentioned that Krista was pregnant. When the topic of finances came up, Sharp said Cowdy often complained about money, his low pay, the cost of retaking his exam, and lingering debts. Yet he continued spending freely on gifts, dinners, hotel stays. One of their last meetings occurred less than 2 weeks before Krista's death. Sharp recalled that Cowdy appeared deeply depressed and told her he felt trapped and overwhelmed. Sharp fully cooperated with authorities, handing over hotel receipts and confirming that shortly after Krista's death, Cootie gave her a DVD player, saying he didn't need it anymore. That same item, investigators noted, had been reported by Cowdy as stolen from the house. Further inquiry cleared Sharp of any direct involvement. She had a verified alibi for the night of the incident and displayed no behavior suggesting complicity. Although no longer a suspect, her statements became critical to understanding the Alexanders' marriage. When the ballistic evidence confirmed the shell casings matched the gun Cowdy had been seen using, investigators brought him back for another interview. This time, his story shifted dramatically. Confronted with the inconsistencies, Cowdy admitted that the morning of June 28th had not unfolded as he first claimed. He said he had fallen asleep on the couch the night before and was running late for his shift. According to his new version, he picked up the handgun to show Krista how it worked, and it accidentally discharged. He insisted the shooting was an accident, not intentional. When he realized Krista was unresponsive, panic set in. Overcome with fear, he said, he made the worst decision of his life. Instead of calling for help, he tried to stage the scene to look like a break-in. He described deliberately scattering items, opening drawers, and leaving jewelry boxes ajar to make the house appear ransacked. He admitted taking 2 rifles and a DVD player to simulate a theft. On his way to work, he said he discarded the handgun along with several personal items, including Krista's jewelry and small belongings, from his car, hoping to create the impression that an intruder had fled hastily. Throughout his statement, Cowdy insisted that he never intended to harm Krista and maintained that the shooting had been a tragic accident. Investigators documented his confession, but flagged it with a note: "Statement requires verification." A skepticism arose immediately. The wound Krista sustained was to the back of her head, with clear signs of soot on the skin, indicating the gun had discharged at extremely close range. Forensic experts noted that under such circumstances, an accidental discharge was highly improbable. Cootie's behavior after the incident also drew scrutiny. Rather than alerting emergency services or attempting to help Krista, he focused on staging a fake burglary before calmly leaving for work. The front door was left open, and Krista's body remained on the floor until morning. Investigators concluded that his confession was not evidence of genuine remorse, but rather a calculated attempt to minimize consequences. The investigation entered its final phase following Cowdy's confession. Detectives retraced the route he claimed to have taken the night of Krista's death, searching the area where he said he had discarded the weapon, hidden in the brush along the roadside. They recovered a 9mm handgun, the very firearm used in the fatal shooting. Forensic analysis confirmed the connection. Ballistics matched the casing found near Krista's body, as well as those collected from the pond where Cootie had been seen firing the weapon the day before. This recovery provided the final, irrefutable piece of evidence linking him directly to the crime. The St. Tammany Parish District Attorney's Office charged Cowdy Alexander with 3 counts: second-degree murder for the death of Krista Alexander, first-degree unlawful termination of a pregnancy for the death of their unborn child, and obstruction of justice for staging the burglary to mislead investigators. A trial was scheduled for August 2009. But before proceedings began, Cowdy accepted a plea deal. His guilty plea led to the dismissal of the jury, and the case moved directly to sentencing. In August 2009, the St. Tammany Parish Court sentenced him to 55 years in prison without the possibility of parole, covering all 3 charges. Krista's parents were present in the courtroom. Pastor Winfred Baker addressed the press, revealing that the family had already chosen forgiveness long before Cowdy Alexander's identity as the perpetrator was confirmed. After the trial, the Baker family returned to their ministry work in Abita Springs, continuing the missionary programs that Krista had once helped lead. A seemingly peaceful small town in Florida has been hiding a dark secret for years. Michael Shaver, husband, father, an aspiring pilot, suddenly disappeared in late 2015. Friends and family received only brief texts and vague social media updates, but no one actually saw him. Meanwhile, his wife, Lori, was relieved, quietly selling off her husband's belongings and moving on as if he had never existed. 3 years later, a concrete block in Lori's backyard was smashed, revealing a grisly truth: a skeleton wrapped in a blue tarp, buried behind the family home. From there, the curtain of mystery gradually opened, a story of contradictions, where love, domestic violence, and lies intertwine. So who took Michael Shaver's life, and what turned a sweet, loving marriage into a tragedy that shocked the entire community? To understand how this nightmare unfolded, we need to go back to the beginning, to a time when Lori and Michael were just two teenagers in love, believing their future together would be nothing but bright. Lori and Michael Shaver were high school sweethearts. They grew up in a small rural town in New York State, where the school had only about 500 students. They met in the mid-1992 in 7th grade and began dating in high school. That same year, Michael dropped out of school because he was not interested in studying. Lori's parents had a frank talk with Michael, advising him that dropping out would make it difficult for him to get a good job and support his family later. This advice influenced Michael. He returned to school, graduated from high school, and went to college. In 2006, they married and soon had a daughter, Isabel. Michael then pursued his dream of becoming a pilot, earned his license, and found work flying. The family went through many changes but stayed together. When Isabel was 1 year old, they moved to Florida, decided they didn't like it, and returned to New York. Later, due to a change in Michael's work, they moved back to Florida again. Michael was flexible and open to change. After that move, he decided to stop flying and switch to engineering. He worked at Disney and later at another company related to amusement rides. Michael also built aircraft models and even assembled his own plane. He frequently changed jobs and moved between states in search of better opportunities. After 2005, they settled in the town of Claremont, Florida. However, the relationship between husband and wife became strained. After nearly 10 years of marriage, Lori began to complain about Michael. In 2010, she told her family that Michael had attacked her after coming home from training and taking a shower, hitting her in the face. She said the bruises had already faded. Another time, just because she wanted a cookie, he threw her on the sofa and hit her. However, for some reason, she did not record or report the injuries, and they quickly disappeared. By mid-November 2015, their marriage was close to falling apart. On November 15, Lori told her family that Michael had left. He walked out without taking his belongings and didn't say where he was going. Lori felt relieved at his departure. The next day, she began selling his things for cash. Michael missed several days of work. Then his boss got an email from him saying he wouldn't be coming back and wanted to resign. This was odd because Michael had worked hard to secure a well-paying job and was very dedicated to it. His manager, who knew him as reliable and hardworking, suspected something was wrong. Michael ignored calls and responded only to a few messages before stopping entirely. He ended up missing a full week of work. When asked to discuss the situation, Michael sent brief messages claiming a family emergency, but no one could reach him directly. Meanwhile, Lori became a single mother to their 7-year-old daughter. She didn't file for child support, saying she earned enough and didn't need his help. Given that Michael had supposedly quit his job, Lori believed he couldn't pay support even if ordered by a court. She also chose not to pursue divorce. On paper, they remained legally married in the years that followed. It all seemed strange. To those closest to Michael, his behavior was out of character. He had never said he planned to leave his family for his career or another woman. It was also odd that he abandoned his greatest passion, an unfinished airplane he had been building for years. At first, a few people paid attention. They didn't immediately notice how drastically Michael's life had changed. After separating from his wife, he cut off contact with everyone, relatives and old friends included. Later, When Michael's mother fell seriously ill and was hospitalized, his brother tried repeatedly to reach him so he could visit her. Michael ignored every call. He only sent brief, evasive texts. Naturally, this angered and hurt his family. He never visited his ailing mother. Eventually, he stopped paying his car installments, and the car was repossessed in 2016. The bank tried to sue him for default, but even that failed. He was declared bankrupt, and no one could find him to serve legal papers. One by one, his documents, driver's license, pilot's license, passport, expired and were canceled. He never applied to renew them. By late February 2018, Real Alarm Sitin. No one had seen Michael in person or knew where he was for almost 3 years. People hadn't panicked earlier because he occasionally posted text updates and random images on social media, though there were no new photos of himself. He also exchanged curt emails with a few friends and family members. Still, by 2018, suspicion had grown. No one had laid eyes on him since 2015, and no one had spoken with him face to face. Close friends kept trying to call. One friend contacted the police to report their concerns and requested a welfare check. Police inquiries quickly showed that Michael hadn't rented or bought property. On paper, he still lived at the house he once shared with his wife and daughter. Officers went to the house and asked Lori how they could reach Michael. She repeated the story about his sudden departure and abandonment of the family. At first, she cooperated and allowed them inside. The house appeared normal, but something felt off. The officers decided to question Lori more carefully. They asked to see the yard and found a concrete slab there. Lori said she'd poured it herself to cover an old, never-finished duck pond. The slab showed signs of large fires, which she claimed she used to burn unwanted items. Remarkably, when pouring the concrete, she carved her name and that of her fiancé Travis Filmer into it. The situation seemed suspicious. The police arranged to return in a few days with cadaver dogs to search the property. After that, Lori's attitude changed abruptly. She became nervous and told the officers they were no longer welcome in her home. This only intensified the investigation. Police began to suspect Lori's involvement in Michael's disappearance and sought a warrant to search the house and grounds, something they had ample cause to request. Given that Michael was supposedly living there, yet hadn't been seen in 3 years, on March 9, 2018, they obtained the warrant and returned. Lori was furious and tried to turn them away. But with the warrant, the search proceeded. In the backyard, a cadaver dog immediately alerted at the concrete slab. Ground-penetrating radar was used to scan the area, revealing a cavity beneath the concrete. Investigators decided to break open the slab to see what was inside. They found a human skeleton wrapped in a blue tarp and tied with a green rope. Michael had been officially reported missing just a month earlier, and the remains were discovered in his own backyard. The bones were in such poor condition that even collecting usable DNA samples was difficult. Identification relied on dental records. A forensic expert then confirmed Michael had died more than 2 years earlier. This only deepened police suspicion, because all the posts and messages reportedly from Michael during that period were fake. Even the writing style suggested someone else had sent them. It seemed obvious the killer had been sending those messages to delay any search for Michael and mislead everyone. Naturally, Lori became the prime suspect. Despite the body's poor condition, the forensic expert determined Michael was killed by a shot to the back of the head from a .38 caliber pistol. Investigators then found something notable in Lori's records. Lori owned a collection of firearms in Florida, including a .38 caliber pistol. When investigators moved to seize it for ballistic testing, she claimed it had been lost or stolen years earlier. Strangely, she had never filed a report about the missing weapon. Even though firearm owners are required to do so, a review of Lori's computer and phone showed she was the only person in Michael's close circle who never called or texted him after he disappeared. This is strange, as Michael is said to have left on November 15, 2015. Moreover, Michael loved his daughter Isabel very much. He was seen as a loving, involved father, and no one believed he would simply abandon her and show no interest in her life. Tracing the IP address used for Michael's social media posts led back to Lori's computer. Lori responded that she wasn't the only one who used it. She said that after Michael's death, she dated multiple men and even tried to remarry, despite not being divorced, so several people had access to the computer at different times. While that meant others could have made the posts, it seemed unlikely. Why would strangers who didn't know Michael impersonate him online? Further investigation suggested Lori may have been unfaithful while Michael was alive. She said she met a man named Jeremy Townsend at her daughter's school. He noticed the bruises Michael had allegedly left on her face. At their next meeting, he gave her a note with his phone number, saying he understood what she was going through and wanted to help. According to Lori, she called Jeremy after another beating. They began a secret relationship. He promised to help her deal with her abusive husband and family problems. Lori said she wanted a divorce, but Michael wouldn't allow it. Lori later claimed she discovered Jeremy had lied, that he had left his wife but not actually divorced her, and that he eventually reconciled with his wife. Still, Lori said this made her realize that she didn't need a husband who abused her like Michael. On November 10, 2015, she told Michael she was leaving him. He took the news calmly, she said. 5 days later, according to Lori, Michael simply left. She claimed she didn't know where he went and didn't care, saying she heard he headed toward Georgia. About 6 months later, in May 2016, Michael allegedly returned home. Lori said he immediately turned violent. He attacked her, threatened to kill her, threw her to the floor, and kicked her in the head. She claimed she was saved only because Jeremy was in the house. Seeing the attack, Jeremy took a gun from her collection and shot Michael in the back of the head, killing him almost instantly because their 7-year-old daughter, Isabel, was in the house. Lori said she feared the child would witness the shooting. According to Lori, she didn't want her daughter to witness all of this, so she wanted to get rid of the body as quickly as possible. She immediately takes Isabel out of the house, while Jeremy stays by Michael's body and promises to take care of the problem, including cleaning up the crime scene. The attack happened on a weekday morning, so Lori was able to take her daughter Isabel to school and return a few hours later. She then learned that Jeremy had used a hole she and Michael had previously dug for a planned pond project that was never completed. He had placed the body in the hole and buried it. In this way, Lori transfers all responsibility for solving the crime scene to Jeremy. Soon after, Lori broke up with Jeremy and began dating Travis Filmer. They were even engaged in 2016. However, they couldn't legally marry because Lori was still married to Michael and had not divorced him. Michael had not been declared dead or missing, making divorce impossible. Lori claims she didn't know whether Michael's body had been buried in the backyard, saying it happened without her consent or presence. She said Jeremy had handled it and refused to discuss it. Travis denied any knowledge of a burial. Meanwhile, it turned out Jeremy was not the person posting on Michael's social media. Detectives quickly discovered that Lori had been misleading relatives, friends, and acquaintances with conflicting stories about Michael's disappearance. She told some relatives he had been arrested and was in prison. She told friends he had run off with another woman. These contradictions deepened suspicion against her. When the detectives make it clear that they do not believe Lori, she continues to deny guilt, but now claims that she is very worried about the outcome of the case. She said she didn't want to lose custody of her daughter and was afraid to involve the police. The more investigators spoke with her, the more inconsistencies they found. Her statements contradicted each other. When police questioned Jeremy, he denied Lori's statements and called her a liar. He said he had no idea what happened to Michael until the investigation. Though there were some doubts about Jeremy's account, investigators found it more credible than Lori's and invited him to cooperate. Jeremy admitted to a brief affair with Lori, which Michael discovered. Jeremy then called his wife, Vanessa Townsend, and told her everything. This led to many conflicts between Jeremy and Vanessa, but he and his wife eventually made up. Even before that, Jeremy had tried to distance himself from Lori because she was turning him against Michael. After Michael disappeared, Lori told Jeremy she had taken care of Michael and that he wouldn't bother them anymore. He didn't know what she meant. Police focused on 2 suspects, Lori and Jeremy, and needed to determine who was responsible or if both were involved. The odds increasingly pointed to Lori, especially since she had been posting on social media to imitate Michael's activity. On September 18, 2020, Lori Shaver was arrested on suspicion of murdering her husband, Michael. Her defense attorney believed the case was winnable, arguing that much of the evidence was circumstantial. The defense strategy appeared to center on claims of self-defense, domestic violence, and Lori's insistence that she had nothing to do with the killing or the concrete encased body. Prosecutors argued that Michael, Jeremy, and Lori were involved in a love triangle, and that during the conflict, one person, Michael, ended up dead. After initial hearings, the charge was reduced to second-degree murder. With possible mitigating factors such as domestic violence and self-defense considered, the trial did not begin until September 2024 due to the need to analyze and compare hundreds of pieces of evidence. By then, prosecutors asserted the killing was neither self-defense nor a love triangle gone wrong. It was a violent felony. As sinister detail remained, Lori claimed Michael disappeared in November, but investigators found his credit card activity stopped in September. Around that same time, neighbors noticed Lori had acquired a large pig that began living in her yard and barn. At the same time, neighbors also began complaining about a strong stench. When questioned, Lori consistently blamed the smell on the new animal. This raised suspicions that the pig might be connected to the crime, though how remained unclear. Notably, the defense attorney withheld parts of their strategy until the start of the hearing. Now, previously confidential case details have been made public. They include statements from Isabel, Michael and Lori's daughter, who was 7 at the time of the crime. She was 15 when the trial began, and about to turn 16. Now a high school senior, she says violence at home was common. Isabel said that her father came home from work almost every day and argued with her mother. His behavior, she said, became increasingly cruel. By fall 2015, Isabel lived in constant fear. When her father arrived, she hid in her bedroom to avoid him. According to her, her mother endured the same environment. Isabel said her mother had to continually fend off her father's attacks. In mid-September 2015, she witnessed another violent incident. One evening on the terrace, Michael started an argument and began beating Lori. Isabel saw her father tackle her mother to the ground and stomp on her head while she screamed for help. Despite being only 7, Isabel decided to act. She ran to her mother's bedroom, where she knew a .38 caliber pistol was kept, grabbed it, returned to the terrace, aimed at her father, and fired several times, hitting the back of his head. In court, she insisted she did what was necessary to protect her mother. She insisted that she had to shoot her father or he would beat her mother to death. Afterward, she said, her mother did not call an ambulance. Instead, her mother called Jeremy, who came to help dispose of the body. If this testimony is correct, then Lori has cleared suspicion of the murder itself, blaming Isabel. While Jeremy takes care of the aftermath, the defense portrayed Lori as a mother trying to shield her child from the consequences of a terrible act. Still, the case remained complex and confusing, with many unanswered questions. The new account failed to resolve timing inconsistencies. Isabel also claims she did not kill Michael outright, but only seriously wounded him, and that he remained alive for some time. The prosecution asked why Lori never called emergency services. Since Michael might have been saved, they argued that Isabel had changed her story multiple times and, like Lori, was lying to reduce Lori's culpability. However, prosecutors could not present a fully convincing alternative sequence of events. Authorities suspect Isabel either colluded with her mother, Lori, or was manipulated into confessing. The theory was that Lori encouraged her to confess because, at 7, Isabel could not be imprisoned. Detectives, meanwhile, had gathered extensive evidence during the years leading up to trial. Despite that effort, not a single witness corroborated Lori's claims. Friends and family said they had never seen Michael act cruelly toward his wife or daughter. They described him as peaceful, calm, and conflict-averse, and said he never laid a hand on Lori. Neighbors also reported no signs of frequent arguments or abuse. Despite Lori's claims of near-daily humiliation, insults, and beatings, The only potentially supporting evidence was Lori's brief request for a restraining order, which she withdrew within a few days. Investigators found no records of other incidents. The prosecution's witnesses rebutted Lori's testimony, and their numbers significantly outnumbered the defense's witnesses. Many people believed Lori was the toxic partner in the marriage. She repeatedly insulted and humiliated Michael, often in public, and even threatened him. She physically attacked him several times. One neighbor testified that he saw Lori point a gun at Michael. That night, Michael was terrified because his wife threatened to shoot him. Notably, this incident occurred just days before his disappearance, which was later determined to be a murder carried out in a similar manner. There were too many troubling coincidences. Many knew Lori was not a victim. Rather, she had allegedly abused Michael for years. Her attorney argued that Michael was a skilled manipulator who concealed signs of domestic violence and pointed to several negative incidents in his past. However, this defense was unconvincing. The only significant entry in Michael's criminal record was a September 2014 charge for initiating a fight. According to the case file, he admitted guilt, apologized, and did not contest the charges. Even one of Lori's friends testified against her, stating that Lori had once admitted to cutting and bruising herself to make Michael look abusive, a tactic used to obtain a restraining order. Some witnesses, however, claimed both spouses were equally toxic and abusive. The case was full of contradictions, and the jury had to decide. After both sides presented their arguments, the jury deliberated for 5 hours and found Lori Shaver guilty of second-degree murder. The jury did not believe Lori's testimony that Isabel, a 7-year-old girl, shot her father, Michael, and that Jerem helped dispose of the body. Lori's attorney announced plans to appeal, but those efforts failed. She remains incarcerated. In the aftermath, Michael's family spoke to journalists several times, trying to restore his reputation. They described him as talented, kind, and likable. Even so, the public opinion remains divided. Some see Michael as a victim, while others view him as a cruel abuser who met a fitting end. It all started with a stalker, anonymous messages, footsteps behind her. The harassment escalated. Ellie called for help, called the police, but was met with silence. Then one night, Ellie disappeared. When she was found, she was no longer a vibrant woman, but a naked body wrapped in a blanket, discarded like a worthless object. A haunting ending. A warning ignored until the last minute. Who did it? A stranger, or someone creepy familiar. And the most terrifying thing, if Ellie's warning had been heeded, would she still be alive? Stay with us until the end, because the truth behind Ellie's case will leave you shaken, and it forces us to ask, who let this happen? In Westchester, Ellen Ellie White, 23, lives in a cozy home. Originally from Minneapolis, Ellie had moved to Westchester with her family years earlier. She now lived on her own with her pet gecko, Gail. Ellie was vibrant and creative. She loved crafting, scrapbooking, writing, designing jewelry, and taking dance classes. Ellie had loved the outdoors since childhood. Her mother remembered her wearing pretty dresses while digging in the yard to plant flowers or build hammocks, returning inside, covered in dirt and smiling. She had just earned her cosmetology license and was entering adulthood with excitement. But in the summer of 2018, things changed. Someone began targeting Ellie. At first, it was just strange messages. Then it gradually escalated into persistent harassment. An anonymous stalker kept sending her text messages using a masked phone number along with fake accounts on Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook. This went on for nearly a year. By then, it was daily, relentless, calculated, and disturbing. Ellie believed it was the work of one person using multiple identities. Then it escalated again. A video arrived on Facebook, filmed from outside her home. It was a gross invasion of privacy, predatory and chilling. More videos followed, showing the same pattern. The stalker had found her home, her safe place. Her best friend, Hannah, described it as a sick cat and mouse game, with Ellie as the prey. Ellie went to the police. She provided several usernames and numbers, including one that stood out, Mikhail or Ma. Officers asked if the name meant anything. Ellie remembered an ex from years earlier, Mikhail, but she wasn't sure. She followed the police's advice and reluctantly took self-defense classes with her mother. Ellie stopped going out at night, but the harassment continued. The messages kept coming. Accounts kept changing, and police struggled to trace anything because the numbers were masked and used random area codes. Ellie's mother contacted police again, asking for increased patrols around her home. Officers did return, but according to records, they spent only about 5 minutes searching the area. Ellie became too afraid to stay alone. Friends took turns sleeping over. Even then, the fear lingered. The stalker had already stood at her window, filming and watching. Her anxiety grew overwhelming. She texted a friend that she didn't feel safe, saying that she was alone and didn't know much self-defense, and that it was taking all of her peace of mind. While chatting with a friend, Ellie received another message, this time from a new Snapchat account named Michael Strauss. Immediately, she realized it was her ex-boyfriend. They had dated when she was 17, bonding over art, music, and festivals. But the relationship quickly soured and she cut off contact. Years later, it seemed he had resurfaced, not as a partner, but as a predator. Ellie immediately told the police. On the 28th of July, she was texting someone she believed was her online friend, Nate. They had chatted often and planned to hang out. He had written that he wasn't bringing his phone and asked if it was okay if he just knocked. At some point that day, Ellie appears to have changed her mind and decided to stay in. When Nate asked about the creepy messages, Ellie brushed it off and said that no one was creepy to her, so she didn't know. She was home alone that night, but it wasn't Nate. It was a fake name on a burner account. Now Michael knew she was alone. On August 1, 2018, Ellie stopped responding to calls and texts. Her mother grew worried and reported her missing. Everyone believed the disappearance was connected to the harassment. Ellie's car was still at home. Her phone showed no new activity. Her bank account hadn't been touched. Everything suggested something terrible had happened. One question lingered. Did police analyze her phone data before she vanished? Could they have identified the person harassing her? Westchester police declined to comment. In the weeks after Ellie disappeared, investigators gathered evidence, but the case was still classified as telecommunication harassment, not stalking, a mistake that would prove costly. One phone number tied to the fake Nate account, the one that tricked Ellie on the night she vanished, had a 213 area code. It was purchased through a site that sells temporary numbers. There was no user data attached, no activity after the night Ellie went missing, and no link to another device. Detectives kept pushing. 2 weeks later, they obtained more details from the site. The account had a username, a sign-up date, and a last login time. Most crucially, it was linked to an email address belonging to Michael Strauss, Ellie's ex-boyfriend. Michael had a long record spanning a decade: burglary, banned substance possession, identity fraud, and public indecency. After the 2015 indecency charge, a court ordered a mental health evaluation and a year of treatment. Even while Ellie was missing, Michael was still targeting other women. Just 53 minutes after the last message sent to Ellie from the 213 number, Michael created a new account on the same site. It showed a clear pattern he didn't intend to stop. After 23 days of searching, authorities confirmed the worst body found in a field in Liberty Township was Ellie's. Her remains were discovered off Milliken Road, naked, wrapped in a blanket, bound with duct tape, and with a plastic bag over her head. The cause of death was asphyxiation. Shockingly, the field was within walking distance of Michael's home. At 4:00 a.m. the next morning, Westchester police arrested him. Michael was held on a $4 million bond while police searched his home and digital devices. Evidence quickly mounted. Google records showed disturbing searches. How long does a dead body smell? Missing girl in Hamilton. Missing girl in Westchester, Ohio, and Ellie. He also researched the Cincinnati Strangler and looked up how to survive prison and a survivor's guide to prison days before Ellie disappeared. What is even more alarming is that searches are sensitive. Predatory searches, jogging abuse, teen abuse adult movies. And where do women jog in Westchester? Investigators said some searches were too graphic to release publicly. His behavior extended beyond searches. Police found dozens of videos he recorded of women jogging, sometimes following them by car, other times lurking near parks. When questioned, Michael admitted filming women he found attractive, wherever he saw them. Most damning. His phone contained a Google Maps screenshot of the exact field where Ellie's body was later found. When questioned, Michael offered an absurd excuse. He claimed he was writing a script and that the field was part of his research, citing his work in the film industry, but investigators already had serious doubt. At his home, they made a horrifying discovery. Inside his art portfolio were Ellie's driver's license, a lock of her hair, and her pink necklace. He had placed these items in a metal tin he called a tribute. Detectives' patience ran out. They confronted him. Why did he have her ID, jewelry, and hair? Michael tried to adjust his statement. He said that Ellie had agreed to take part in a sensitive video for which he was reportedly paid thousands of dollars to produce. He insisted it was consensual and that Ellie knew what she was doing. He claimed that while filming at his home, she accidentally suffocated with a plastic bag over her head. According to him, the camera was rolling and captured her death. He said he panicked, deleted the footage, and threw away the memory card. But there was no evidence of any video, no camera, no memory card, no proof. What investigators did find were handcuffs attached to a bed frame in his basement. There was no plausible scenario in which Ellie voluntarily went to his house, wrapped in a blanket with zip ties on her wrists. Every piece of evidence told the real story. Ellie had been lured, abducted, and killed. Michael Strauss was formally charged with her murder. As the case unfolded, it became clear the justice system had missed multiple chances to act, opportunities to take Ellie's fears seriously, investigate further, and stop Michael before he struck. It was too late. Ellie, vibrant, creative, and full of love, was gone. With Michael in custody, the investigation into Ellie's death entered its final stages. Law enforcement confirmed he now faced a murder charge in addition to earlier harassment-related charges. At a press conference, authorities thanked the public. Tips from Ellie's friends, community members, and countless others helped bring clarity to a complex, heartbreaking case. The investigation had grown beyond the Westchester Police Department's capacity because of its digital evidence, emotional impact, and scope. Multiple agencies joined: the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, the Butler County Sheriff's Office, the Department of Natural Resources, and the FBI's Major Crimes and Behavioral Science Units. A specialized digital evidence team also worked to trace communications and online activity. Michael Strauss, 29, was indicted by a grand jury on 9 counts: aggravated murder, 3 counts of tampering with evidence, menacing by stalking, petty theft, abuse of a corpse, and gross abuse of a corpse. Ellie's funeral was not a traditional day of mourning. Guests wore tie-dye, Ellie's favorite, and brought mementos for a scrapbook. People played drums, made music, and planted seeds for flowers and trees. It wasn't just a funeral, it was a celebration of her spirit. The next day, a memorial service continued. More than 100 people gathered to remember her, releasing balloons as a symbolic letting go of pain, fear, anger, and sorrow. Others said she was love, music, laughter, pure light. Ellie touched everyone she met, and the community wanted her remembered for how she lived, not how she died. Meanwhile, the court prepared for trial. More than 800 pages of evidence were submitted. The case against Michael is complex, both digitally, physically, and testimonially. Still, his defense introduced a controversial argument. Although Michael had already admitted to killing Ellie, his attorneys moved to access her medical records and therapy notes. They argued that her mental health and prescription medications might have contributed to her death. In court, they pointed to her history of depression and anxiety, suggesting, without much detail, that her death could have been accidental and linked to medication misuse. However, the prosecution quickly dismissed that allegation, pointing to the toxicology report. It detailed exactly which substances were in Ellie's system when she died. They argued that her mental health history had nothing to do with her death. She was suffocated while bound with duct tape, wrapped in a blanket, and dumped in a field. Raising her mental health, they said, was not only irrelevant but deeply offensive. They rejected the defense's attempt to shift attention to Ellie's personal struggles. The case was about Michael Strauss, his stalking, deception, abduction, and ultimately, murder. No trial followed. Michael Strauss pleaded guilty to the murder of Ellen Ellie Wake. The plea brought some relief, but not closure. Nothing can erase what Ellie had to endure or the future she was deprived of. Still, her family, friends, and community ensured her voice was heard. Justice, however bittersweet, finally arrived. As a result of the guilty plea, 6 of Michael's original charges were dismissed, reducing his potential sentence. At sentencing, Michael addressed the court, claiming he never intended harm and expressing regret. He called himself a failure to Ellie, to society, to his family, and to hers. He said his guilt would be a lifelong burden and did not ask for forgiveness. Ellie's father, David, said he didn't know if he could ever forgive. Michael's mother offered condolences to Ellie's family and spoke of her own anguish, then asked the judge to impose the maximum penalty. The judge did so. Michael Strauss received a prison sentence of 15 years to life for aggravated murder, 18 months for menacing by stalking, and 1 year for desecrating a corpse. The sentences run consecutively. With credit for time served, he will be eligible for parole in 2036, with another opportunity in 2041. The judge noted the case did not qualify for life without parole, even though the crime's nature could have warranted it. The motive was never fully established. Prosecutors called it an act of perversion, planned, directed, and staged by Michael with himself as the central figure. Investigators stressed that Ellie did everything she could. She reported harassment, documented threats, and sought help. Yet the system failed her. An internal review of the Westchester Police Department led to discipline. Officer James Thomas received a 40-hour unpaid suspension for failing to follow proper procedures when Ellie first reported in April 2018. He did not document key details, Michael Strauss's name, address, or his connection through Ellie's ex-boyfriend, and failed to include crucial evidence like emails, videos, and texts in the official report. That lack of urgency and inaction may have contributed to the outcome. Newly released court documents said Michael allegedly told a fellow inmate that Ellie was not his first victim, claiming he killed another woman named Shell and left her in a creek. The account echoed Ellie's case, but authorities could not identify Shell or verify the confession. There were other concerns. In January 2018, a female jogger was attacked on her usual route by a man in a black hoodie and mask. She escaped, and the attacker was never identified. But the details were consistent with Michael's known behavior. During the investigation, police found dozens of videos Michael took of women jogging. He appeared fixated on following and recording female runners, often from his car or in public spaces. Law enforcement believes there may be other victims. The full extent of Michael Strauss's actions remains unknown. In the United States, millions of people are stalked each year, and stalking often precedes more serious violence. In many homicides involving women, stalking is documented before the killing. Ellie's story reflects this broader reality, where repeated warnings are ignored and prevention systems fall short. Ellie reported her stalker, shared evidence, and asked for help. Yet she was not protected. Her death profoundly affected her family, friends, and community. A rainbow appeared in the field where she was found, an image her family keeps, alongside memories of her creative, joyful life. Her legacy endures through tributes, memorials, and continued advocacy. Her story stands as a stark reminder of the consequences of inaction. As dusk fell, Randy Stone, a devoted Marine veteran, faithful husband, and gentle father of two, was found lying motionless in a pool of blood in the middle of his office. The first person to notice the scene was his once loving wife, who quickly changed her story. What followed shook a community built on faith and love. For behind the soothing hymns, inspiring sermons, and exemplary pastoral family image lay a dark truth, a decades-long secret affair, and a cold, murderous plot so elaborate it would make even the most seasoned investigators shudder. This is the story of Randy Stone, a man of absolute faith, yet it was that very faith that became his fatal weakness. As his death tore apart the veil of morality and exposed the darkness within the very place he believed himself to be safest. Randy Stone was born on June 14, 1967, in Kansas City, Missouri, to Leonard and Clara Stone. Raised with strong Midwestern values, he had a particularly close bond with his mother. Friends described him as a man of contrasts, tough and disciplined on the outside, but gentle and thoughtful on the inside. He was the type who could spend hours lifting weights at the gym, then come home and write poetry for the woman he loved. After graduating from high school in 1986, at Agaotin, Randy joined the Marine Corps. Like many young men of his generation, he served for nearly 4 years, serving with honor and duty. When he completed his service, Randy decided to return to his hometown of Kansas City, where he could find familiarity, and especially Teresa, a girl he had known since childhood. Teresa, born in 1971, comes from a family that has been close to Randy for many years. When Randy came home from the Marines, their friendship quickly reignited and soon turned into a romantic relationship. Teresa was known for her beauty, charm, and lively, outgoing nature. To Randy, she was everything he'd ever wanted. After just 7 months of dating, they married in 1990. Both were deeply religious, and their church wedding was not just a ceremony, it was a sacred commitment before God. Surrounded by family and supported by faith, Randy and Teresa soon welcomed 2 children, their son Michael and their daughter Miranda. Randy embraced fatherhood with enthusiasm. He was present at every school play and birthday, always putting family at the center of his life. In addition to taking care of his family, Randy also built his own career. In 1997, he opened an insurance office in Independence, Missouri, in partnership with Farmers Insurance. Over the next 13 years, he built it into one of the most successful agencies in the area. Thanks to his skill with numbers, natural warmth, and integrity, he earned the trust and respect of clients and colleagues alike. Teresa worked beside him, managing administrative duties and helping with clients. Together, they created a comfortable, stable, middle-class life that seemed ideal from the outside. Their affection for each other was easy to see. Randy often held Teresa's hand or showed small gestures of love in public. Many people believed they had the perfect life. Yet, their true foundation went deeper than family or business. Their lives revolved around faith, specifically, New Hope Baptist Church in Independence, Missouri. Randy wasn't just a member of New Hope. He was deeply involved in church life. He drove the bus to Sunday school, taught the Bible with passion, and served on the church's finance committee and records management team. Teresa also contributed. She served in the kitchen, prepared meals, sang in the choir, and organized community events. Theirs was the kind of family every church would want in its congregation. But they weren't the only family so deeply committed to New Hope Baptist Church. There was also the family of Pastor David Love. David was born on March 13, 1960, into a family of missionaries. Ministry is not only his mission, but also his family legacy. His relatives had devoted generations to spreading the gospel. After finishing high school, David pursued higher education and later entered the ministry, becoming the pastor of New Hope Baptist Church in 1999 at the age of 38. Pastor David is known for his dynamic sermons and ability to engage his listeners. He made Scripture feel real and helped people feel seen and understood. Members of the congregation admired and trusted him, often confiding in him. David married Kim Love, whom he met in college. They wed on June 26, 1982, and had 3 children together. Kim was known for her warm Southern accent and outgoing nature. She was a devoted wife and mother who supported David's pastoral work and stayed active in church life. At first glance, David's family seems like the ideal pastoral family, but the truth is more complicated. Before joining New Hope Baptist Church, David served at another church in Virginia. Details about his time there are scarce, but reports suggest his departure was not entirely voluntary. Rumors circulated about financial discrepancies, about $30,000 that went missing. David was unable to fully explain the loss, and eventually, he resigned. When he arrived in Independence, Missouri, no one at New Hope Baptist knew about his past in Virginia. Or if they did, they believed in forgiveness and second chances, values central to their faith. Kim says that in the early years of their marriage, David treated her like a queen. But as time went on, she began to notice changes. Kim became increasingly wary of certain women in the congregation who showed interest in her husband. And worse, he didn't seem to completely ignore the attention. One woman, in particular, concerned Kim Teresa Stone. She seemed to capture David's attention more than anyone else. The first sign of trouble came in 2004, when Teresa announced her pregnancy. It should have been good news, but the problem was that her husband, Randy, had been sterilized. For most men, this revelation would raise immediate doubts and anger. But Randy deeply loved and trusted Teresa. He consoled himself by saying that sterilization procedures don't always work, and he missed his post-surgery checkup, so pregnancy was still possible. Randy chose to believe it. Sadly, Teresa later suffered a miscarriage, ending any chance of knowing for sure about the baby. However, the doubts remained. By 2008, those questions had grown impossible to ignore. Randy shocked friends and fellow church members by announcing his plan to resign from New Hope Baptist Church. He believed Teresa and Pastor David were having an affair. When Randy confided his suspicions to someone he trusted, they dismissed the idea, insisting Teresa loved him, and David would never betray his congregation or his faith. Amidst these reassurances, Randy began to doubt himself. Maybe he was thinking too much. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. So Randy decided to stay in the church, continue to care for his family, and try to mend the relationship. Ironically, when Teresa caught him watching adult films, it was Pastor David who offered to help. David suggested weekly counseling sessions, private meetings, to help Randy overcome his struggles and strengthen his marriage. Randy agreed, not realizing he was seeking counseling from the very man who was betraying him. For 2 years, he met with David, sharing his faults and seeking guidance, unaware that David and Teresa's affair continued in secret the entire time. March 31, 2010, began like any ordinary day in Independence, Missouri. The sun rose over the quiet streets as people headed to work and children went to school. That afternoon, Teresa arrived at her husband Randy's insurance office, but immediately sensed something was wrong. The blinds in Randy's office were closed, which was strange. He only closed them after dark, yet now they were shut tight in the middle of the day. His car was outside, so he had to be there. But when Teresa tried the front door, it was locked, another unusual sign. The office should have been open, and staff working, using her key. Teresa went inside and called for Randy. No answer. She checked the storage room. Everything looked normal, but Randy was nowhere to be found. Anxiety rising. She made her way toward her own office. What she found there would haunt her forever. Randy lay on the floor, unmoving. Blood covered the carpet and splattered the walls. Randy Stone was dead. For a moment, Teresa stood frozen. Then, acting on instinct, she grabbed the office phone. Instead of calling 911, she called her parents and said that Randy had been shot and he was dead. Her parents urged her to call 911 immediately. However, when she called, her story changed. She didn't mention a shooting, only that something had happened to her husband, that he was unresponsive, and that she didn't know what to do. She noted blood coming from his ear, but claimed she had no idea what caused it. The dispatcher told her to wait outside for help. Shortly after, Pastor Kim and David arrived. When police arrived, they asked David to take Teresa away to calm her down. But Kim offered instead. David agreed and left with Teresa's parents. Meanwhile, investigators began to examine the scene. Randy had been shot in the back of the head. There were no signs of a struggle, indicating that the killer had likely approached from behind while Randy worked at his desk and executed him with a single shot. The murder weapon was missing, but money on Randy's desk was untouched, ruling out robbery. This wasn't random. It was targeted and deliberate. Investigators later confirmed that the gun used was Randy's own .22 caliber handgun, taken from his home and later disposed of. This suggested the killer was familiar with Randy's family and habits. Detectives focused their investigation on those close to him, and the name Pastor David Love kept coming up. Many witnesses saw them together frequently, with intimate gestures that crossed the line between pastor and parishioner. Some noticed suspicious eye contact, hand contact, or private conversations. The most important evidence came from the phone logs. Teresa and David were in frequent contact, especially in the days before Randy was murdered. The frequency and timing of the calls immediately aroused the police's suspicions, brought in for questioning. Teresa at first insisted that she and David were just friends, that he was simply counseling her, but as the evidence mounted, she changed her story. Teresa admitted she and David had developed a close relationship, so close it had become an affair. Their relationship, she confessed, had lasted about 10 years. It began innocently as a friendship between a pastor and an active church member, but over time it turned physical, and eventually, she said tearfully, it became love. For a decade, they had stood together in church, singing hymns, praying, and preaching about morality while secretly living a lie. Yet, the investigation uncovered something even darker. Teresa told investigators that David had discussed with her getting rid of their spouses, not just breaking up or divorcing, but getting rid of them permanently. According to her, David's plan was to murder both Randy and his own wife, Kim, so he and Teresa could be together without dealing with divorce, dividing assets, or explaining anything to their children. It was, in the darkest sense, a final solution. After Teresa's confession, the investigation turned its full attention to David. However, when police tried to bring him in for questioning, they discovered that he had disappeared. He had taken his family to South Carolina, found a job as a truck driver, and tried to live under the radar. In the digital age, however, hiding is nearly impossible. Using cell phone data and financial transactions, investigators traced his movements and uncovered his hiding place. Tips from people who recognized him confirmed his location in South Carolina. On April 15, 2010, just 2 weeks after Randy Stone's murder, police found and arrested David without incident. There was no chase or violence, just a quiet, carefully executed arrest. He was returned to Missouri to face justice. 8 months later, under growing pressure and fearful of spending life in prison, Teresa finally told investigators the entire story. She explained how David obtained the murder weapon, admitting that she had given him the keys to her house and the code to the gun safe where Randy's firearms were kept. She also provided details about Randy's schedule, and when he would be alone, investigators found a message Teresa had written, saying that she wanted him dead. Those 4 words became critical evidence, proof of premeditation, conspiracy, and intent to commit murder. Teresa hadn't just had an affair or passively allowed Randy to be killed. She had actively helped plan his death. Prosecutors believed Teresa only agreed to testify in hopes of receiving a reduced sentence. Her cooperation revealed the full extent of the plot. For 2 years, David had counseled Randy privately, gaining his trust and learning his deepest fears. He later used that knowledge to manipulate Randy and ultimately orchestrate his murder. Confronted with overwhelming evidence, David accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. This allowed him to avoid a first-degree murder trial, which could have resulted in the death penalty. The court sentenced him to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years, for cooperating with investigators and providing detailed testimony about the crime's planning and execution. Teresa received a reduced sentence of 8 years in prison. During the investigation, she revealed something that deeply unsettled everyone involved. David had once considered murdering his wife, Kim Love. He had even planned it in detail, intending to break her neck and make it look like an accident by pushing her car down an embankment. Thankfully, that plan was never carried out. Kim narrowly escaped becoming another victim of her husband's deadly intentions. After all, Kim and her 3 children sat down to talk about the terrible betrayal they had suffered. Remarkably, they said they held no hatred toward David. Instead, they focused on healing and moving forward, refusing to let anger control their lives. Kim later divorced David and remarried, starting anew far from the shadow of his crimes. Clara Stone, Randy's mother, spoke with deep sorrow about her son, describing him as a loving husband and father whose devotion to Teresa never wavered. When Teresa received her 8-year prison sentence, Clara could not hide the pain and devastation the ordeal had caused. The image of a happy, loving family had been destroyed, replaced with betrayal, deceit, and heartbreak. Randy and Teresa's children, Michael and Miranda, later made the difficult choice to forgive their mother. They said they could not bear to lose her too, after already losing their father. Their forgiveness was difficult for many to understand, but for them, it was the only path toward peace. David Love remains imprisoned at the Southeast Correctional Center in Charleston, Missouri. He will be eligible for parole in 2036, when he will be 76 years old. After completing her sentence, Teresa was released and reportedly began a new life in Kansas City, Missouri, living quietly with a new partner. The story of Randy Stone is a true tragedy. It reminds us that evil does not always reveal itself openly. Sometimes it wears the face of a trusted friend, hides behind the guise of faith, or stands beside you in church, appearing righteous while plotting betrayal in secret. Randy Stone was a good man, devoted to his family, loyal to his community, and steadfast in his faith. He loved deeply and trusted completely. Tragically, those very qualities, which should have been his greatest strengths, became the reasons for his downfall.
Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Kathleen Shepard. Kathleen Shepard and her friend Detsy Hughes grew up across the street from each other in the small town of Dayton, Iowa, which has a population of less than 1,000 people. In this quiet town, everyone knows one another. Kathleen was 3 years older than Detsy. In 2013, she was 15, while Detsy was 12. Despite the age difference, they were best friends and did everything together, often walking home from the school bus stop. At approximately 4 p.m. on May 20, 2013, after being dropped off by the bus, they noticed that a red pickup truck was following them. The man in the truck caught their attention by offering them a chance to earn some pocket money. He said he owned a lawn care business and needed help. Although he was a little skeptical about their lawn mowing abilities, he was so convincing that they began to trust him. The man said he could drive them home to get ready, then they would go to work together, and he would pay them right away. However, when they got in the car, he changed his plans. Instead of taking them home, he drove them out of town. When Kathleen and Detsy sensed something was wrong and tried to resist, the man pulled out a weapon and threatened to kill them if they didn't comply. He took them to an old, abandoned house and brought them to a dilapidated barn that hadn't been used for years. He tied them up, threw them face down in the dirt, and warned them that if they obeyed him, they wouldn't be harmed and he would eventually let them go, even offering to give them a ride back to town. At that moment, Detsy realized something was very wrong. First, if he's not planning to kill them, why go so far from the city? Second, the presence of a weapon suggested otherwise from the beginning. Kathleen's last words were, "They don't deserve this." After that, the kidnapper took her into the woods, giving Detsy a chance to escape. Detsy couldn't explain why Kathleen was taken or what happened to Kathleen since she didn't witness it. Although the kidnapper threatened them with a weapon, he was so careless that he left it right in front of Detsy while taking Kathleen away. Detsy was able to loosen her ropes and escape. While fleeing, she grabbed a weapon for protection in case he tried to catch her. Scared, she navigated through the forest, avoiding thorny roots, and then followed a dirt road in search of help. There were no people around. Despite her injuries, Detsy did not give in to the pain. She felt as though the kidnapper was still pursuing her and that escape was impossible. In her desperate situation, she called out for help, and people nearby brought her to the police. Detsy was terrified. During her escape, she had lost her shoes and sustained several cuts on her legs and feet, which were bloody but not life-threatening. While her physical injuries healed quickly, the emotional scars lingered. Although she received rehabilitation, she still struggles with the psychological effects from the traumatic experience. Detsy provided a detailed description of the kidnapper and his car, giving detectives a solid chance of locating him before he could harm anyone else. Later that evening, around 8 p.m., a body was discovered in the countryside, near the area where Detsy was rescued, at a country estate northeast of Dayton, Iowa. The deceased was identified as 42-year-old Michael Klunder, who Detsy later recognized as her kidnapper. Interestingly, the cause of his death was not revealed for some time. The situation was confusing because Michael did not leave any suicide notes, and there were no clues about where to search for Kathleen. The police had to conduct the search for her without clear leads. Detectives investigated Michael's background for possible clues and found some information. He had his first trial in 1989 when he was just 17 years old and was from Mason City, Iowa, USA. On February 22, 1989, Michael knocked on Jill Gilsey's door, claiming that his car had broken down and asking to use her phone. Instead of just helping him, Jill offered to give him a ride home so he could deal with his car issues. He accepted her offer immediately without any hesitation. As soon as Jill opened the door, he attacked her, knocking her down, hitting her several times, and trying to strangle her with his bare hands. Despite the brutal attack and severe bruising on her neck, Jill fought back and, with the last of her strength, pushed him away. She was determined to seek justice for this horrific incident. Michael faced charges for second-degree burglary and assault with intent to cause serious injury, both of which were aggravated offenses. However, after his arrest, a judge decided to set a bail amount that was below the maximum for those charges, allowing him the potential to be released. This leniency angered Jill and others, as it seemed the judge underestimated the severity of his actions. Fortunately, Michael could not afford the bail, so he remained in custody. Michael remains in custody, awaiting his sentencing hearing. Jill and many others who know Michael believe he is not receiving the punishment he deserves, which worries them. During the preliminary hearing, a decision was made regarding whether Michael, the 17-year-old, should be tried as an adult or as a juvenile. The juvenile judge chose to recuse himself because Michael Klunder displayed alarming behavior from the start. He had a history of being problematic and aggressive, particularly toward girls. In November of that year, Michael enticed a classmate into the school restroom. He threatened her with a weapon and demanded that she take off her shirt, but the girl resisted and tried to escape from him. In response, he struck her on the head with a metal object and physically assaulted her. This resulted in serious injuries, and the girl spent about a week recovering in the hospital. By February 1989, it was reported that Michael had been released after fulfilling all court orders following the incident with the girl in the restroom. Michael returned to live with his father and stepmother in Mason City. However, he soon began to have aggressive outbursts. Shortly after, he attacked a girl named Jill and was arrested. While in custody, officials advised against allowing him to interact with older inmates due to concerns that he might either act aggressively or be bullied because of the charges against him. However, his skills as a liar and manipulator posed a risk of negatively influencing other young offenders. Facing serious charges, he could be sentenced to up to 12 years in prison and fined up to $15,000. If he had been tried as a minor, he would have faced a maximum of 7 years. This situation provided his lawyer with both a clear goal and leverage. On March 30th, Michael pleaded guilty to attempted burglary and attempted assault with intent to cause serious harm. Just 5 weeks before his 18th birthday, he learned his sentence. Michael was taken to the mental health center in Cherokee for a psychiatric evaluation. While imprisoned, he was sentenced to 5 years for attacking Jill. He spent his 18th birthday in prison and received an additional 2 years for robbery. However, these sentences were to run concurrently, meaning he would still be released after 5 years. This news troubled Jill, but there was nothing she could do about it. The court had decided that extending his sentence would be inhumane, likely hoping he could be rehabilitated despite being a potentially dangerous criminal. Despite the short sentence, Michael's lawyers sought to have it reduced. Their main argument was that he was still a minor, even though he was tried as an adult. Fortunately, in September 1989, the court refused to modify its ruling. 2 years passed, and he completed his sentence for robbery, but he still had 3 years remaining for the charges of bodily harm and assault before his official release. Michael adhered to all court orders and took part in a rehabilitation program for individuals at risk of committing abuse. He took the program seriously and attended all the lectures, but it seemed unlikely that he genuinely wanted to change his behavior. His lawyer approached the case with determination, believing that Michael was ready for release. Michael had a flawless prison record, with no incidents or fights during his incarceration, which worked in his favor. Michael's defenders succeeded in getting his case reviewed, resulting in his release in 1991, shortly after his 20th birthday. However, he was placed on probation. From the start, it became clear that his old habits were resurfacing. In 1992, 2 young girls, both just 3 years old, disappeared near Michael's home while playing in a sandbox. Their parents quickly realized the girls had been abducted and reported it to the police, prompting an immediate search, fearing the worst. An unknown caller contacted the police station, reporting that the 2 missing girls had been found at a bus stop nearly 100 kilometers from their hometown. A passerby noticed a small orange container under a canopy at the bus stop. Upon opening it, he was startled by what he discovered and promptly alerted the authorities. When officers arrived, they found the girls, who were both injured. Though several witnesses had identified Michael as a suspect, he had not yet been charged. One witness recalled seeing him observe young girls from his window, spending extended periods in his kitchen or living room watching as children played outside or as schoolgirls returned home. In light of the girls' abduction, this behavior raised alarm. The day after the girls were located, police visited Michael's home to question him. However, at that time, detectives lacked sufficient evidence. They faced a challenge in gathering information about the kidnappers from the 3-year-old victims without causing further trauma. Due to their young age and fear, the girls were unable to provide meaningful details. After an initial conversation, detectives still had no valuable information. Michael denied any involvement in the kidnapping, and without evidence, the police had no basis to detain him. Michael took advantage of the delay, got into his 1982 Honda, and left the state, heading to Florida. However, his getaway was cut short when the car broke down on the road. This forced him to seek help from a relative who lived nearby. Eventually, Michael was arrested on Christmas Eve. The arrest occurred at a bus stop in Houston, thanks to an anonymous tip received by law enforcement. It turned out that the call had come from Michael's relative, who suspected that he was up to something, even though they had no knowledge of the situation involving the kidnapped girls. The 3-year-old victims lived in the same residential complex in Cherokee, where the troubling events had taken place. Despite appearing to be a safe place under surveillance, it seems he had been watching the girls for a while before realizing they were alone. CCTV footage from the complex showed the girls playing before they suddenly looked away and moved in another direction. Detectives believe Michael managed to attract their attention while remaining out of sight of the cameras. This plan worked. The girls' miraculous rescue was even covered on television. Michael had hidden them in a container, which he sealed and left at the bus stop. If the box hadn't been discovered within a few hours, the outcome could have been very different. It was a fortunate coincidence, along with the vigilance of a passerby, that led to their rescue. Doctors reported that while the children had not been abused, they did have injuries. One showed visible signs of strangulation around her neck. The other girl could have suffered the same fate, but for unknown reasons, the criminal seemed less focused on her. In a frightened, fragmented manner, the girl described how a large man had grabbed her neck, making it hard for her to breathe. Fortunately, something caused him to stop. This miraculous rescue also helped police gather crucial information. Initially, the girls were too scared to talk freely to detectives, but over time, they revealed that the criminal had attempted to strangle both of them when he took them away to a remote location. Witnesses had a clear memory of the attacker and provided a description that closely resembled Michael Klunder. Following this, he was arrested and charged with kidnapping and harming children. In Iowa, kidnapping can result in a life sentence, and his previous criminal history raised concerns. Michael was genuinely shocked when detectives returned to his home to read him his rights. During the hearing, his lawyer argued for a lighter sentence. Michael was convicted of third-degree kidnapping, but the assault charge was reduced since no one died in the incident and the choking was considered less severe. He received a 2-year sentence for causing bodily harm and a 10-year sentence for each count of third-degree kidnapping. The jury reached their verdict quickly. By the time he was incarcerated, another crime had been solved just 5 months later, revealing that he had also been involved in other kidnapping incidents that he had not disclosed. Fortunately, those incidents did not lead to any fatalities. Ultimately, the court sentenced him to over 30 years in prison, to be served consecutively, with no possibility of parole. His lawyer continued to argue that instead of prison, Michael needed rehabilitation and support for reintegration into society. There was some merit to this argument, as Michael's behavior during his first arrest was concerning. He appeared detached and indifferent when speaking with police. After Michael confessed, he was asked why he felt it was necessary to kidnap his victims. He couldn't provide a solid explanation and later claimed it was due to having a bad day. It's unclear what behaviors might lead to leniency in prison, but Michael was released in 2011 after serving only 20 years. However, this was followed by another probation period, which he failed to complete. Before he could fully adjust to being free, he began to act out again, leading to a more tragic outcome. This time, Michael kidnapped Kathleen and Detsy. Detsy was rescued by accident, but the search for Kathleen continues. This incident increased the total number of confirmed victims of Michael to 7, most of whom were minors. However, the actual number could be greater. In 1992, Michael lived in another state where he committed additional crimes, including the kidnapping of an 18-year-old girl named Lori Lee Smith, whom he lured with his car. At the time, Lori was driving home on a quiet country road late at night. Suddenly, she noticed someone behind her flashing their headlights and signaling her to stop. Believing it was an emergency, Lori pulled over and rolled down her window. Michael then approached her vehicle, claiming that her taillights were out and offering to help check them. Unaware of the danger, Lori got out of her car. As soon as Lori reached the side of the trunk, Michael pulled out a knife and threatened her. He tried to lure her into his car, but Lori was brave and fiercely resisted him. They struggled inside Michael's vehicle until a passing truck interrupted them. It's important to note that Michael typically kept his victims alive until the last moment, with the exception of Kathleen. After Michael was released in 2011 and before he kidnapped Kathleen and Detsy in 2013, there was a significant period during which his actions went unaccounted for. This gap raised concerns and warranted further investigation to determine if there were other victims or crimes that had not yet been discovered. During this time, Michael had plenty of opportunities to commit more crimes, and there were few signs that he intended to change his ways. It was believed that he could have committed many similar offenses, some of which might have resulted in deaths. His victims were often saved by sheer luck or unexpected circumstances. There could be other unresolved kidnappings and murders linked to him. For example, he was suspected of being involved in the disappearances of two 8-year-old girls in 2012, Leary Cook Morrissey and Elizabeth Collins from Evansdale, Iowa. However, proving a connection to these cases was not possible. At the time of Leary and Elizabeth's observation, Michael's phone was detected in a different location, which cleared him of suspicion. This case remains unsolved, and the fate of 15-year-old Kathleen is still uncertain. Detectives are analyzing the information and investigating the final days of Michael's life. Interestingly, he appeared to be maintaining a normal life. He had a steady job, purchased a house, and was married to a woman named Lisa, who also came from a small town. Michael preferred small towns because children there tend to be more trusting, many homes are often left unlocked, and it can be easier for criminals to operate. Michael was fortunate not only in finding victims but also in eluding detection. Even though he should have been registered as an abuse offender and was under constant watch by the authorities, Lisa was completely unaware of his past. As a result, detectives decided to search their home first. On February 25, 2013, law enforcement officers spoke with neighbors to see if anyone had seen Kathleen, but no one recognized her photo. Lisa, who listened in shock to the revelations from the police about her husband, felt overwhelmed and was unable to provide any useful information to the investigator. Around this time, 12-year-old Detsy had regained her composure. She spoke with the detectives and later participated in several interviews, which helped them piece together the details of her escape. Detectives searched the barn but did not find Kathleen there. Hopes for her safe return quickly faded when bloodstains found in Michael's car were matched to her DNA. The circumstances surrounding Kathleen remained unclear, but they were able to make some predictions about Michael's behavior. When he returned and discovered that Detsy had escaped and taken his weapon with her, he concluded that it was all over for him and took his own life. Michael likely feared returning to prison, knowing that other inmates would have treated him terribly for his crimes against children. Something terrible must have happened to Kathleen, leading him to choose death over life in prison. Even after Detsy's escape, there were still no updates about Kathleen. The search continued, and in those initial days, they discovered the girls' backpacks, which Michael had left behind in the forest. Kathleen Shepard's fate was discovered 2 weeks later when a body was found in the river, a few kilometers from her hometown. Unfortunately, her body's condition had deteriorated, making identification difficult. Eventually, it was confirmed that the body belonged to Kathleen Shepard. Investigators found signs of sharp objects on her body and the same bindings used to restrain Detsy. In this way, Kathleen became Michael's last victim. This situation raises questions regarding Michael as an individual. In light of these events, the public expressed outrage towards law enforcement, accusing them of protecting dangerous criminals more than the victims. Interestingly, Lisa, Michael's wife, was one of the few who genuinely mourned him. Could she have been the only person to see some humanity in him that could inspire affection? Or was her seeming affection a result of her husband's manipulative behavior? On December 24, 1988, an Arizona police station received a call from the area in Pinal County, not far from the so-called Superstition Mountains. Witnesses had found the body of a young woman with signs of violence. She was in casual clothes and without a purse or any identifying documents, therefore, the victim could not be immediately identified. There was a deep wound on her leg, and blood was on her body. Her neck had been cut and was completely covered with stab wounds. All of her clothes were soaked in blood. An autopsy of the woman's body revealed that the injuries sustained were much more serious than they initially appeared to the witness. The victim had several deep, penetrating wounds in her neck that pierced the spine and practically separated her head from her body. 4 additional stab wounds had broken 2 ribs and pierced her heart. The most terrible marks were barely noticeable bruises on her left temple and eyebrow. The forensic expert was not certain, but suspected that these were marks from the sole of a shoe. On the ground where the body was found, forensic experts discovered similar marks, suggesting that she had been deliberately pressed to the ground with a foot to limit her mobility and inflict these fatal wounds. In addition to these obvious injuries, the unidentified victim had traces of prolonged beating on her face and body, scratches on her knees, and a defensive wound on one of her hands. It was clear that the crime had been committed with intent. Detectives believed that the killer should be sought among her acquaintances, but she had not yet been identified. However, that same day, the situation changed when the county police department received a call from Kathy Monkman, who reported that her older sister had gone missing the day before. The missing woman's name was Cynthia Monkman. Kathy explained that her sister had not shown up for a Christmas party, which was planned for the night before Christmas Eve. This was strange because Cynthia had been actively involved in organizing the event. She hadn't even warned anyone that she would not be able to come. After that, she stopped answering calls. Kathy did not immediately report Cynthia's disappearance to the police. She thought it was possible that Cynthia might have changed her plans. However, the next day, they were supposed to fly home together to Illinois. Kathy left a note with the flight information and a ticket for the 7:30 a.m. departure. She still hoped that Cynthia would show up, but when Kathy got on the plane and did not see her sister in the seat next to her, she realized that something terrible had happened. Kathy provided a description of the missing person that matched the found unidentified body, including the timeline of Cynthia's disappearance, which was just a day before her body was discovered in the desert. Detectives learned that shortly before her death, Cynthia had spontaneously married a man she had met a couple of months earlier. After comparing all the known facts, law enforcement officers came to the conclusion that they had found 30-year-old Cynthia Monkman, who was later identified by her sister and confirmed by dental records. Cynthia was born on September 16, 1958, in Pensacola, Florida. Her younger sister was born a year later, and from the very beginning, they were inseparable. Their father, Jack, was a psychologist, while their mother, Dorothy, became a housewife when the girls were born. Another child, a boy, was born 2 years later. The family moved to Champaign, Illinois, where their father was invited to work. The life of this close-knit family turned tragic when Dorothy discovered she had breast cancer. 2 years later, despite all efforts, Dorothy died, leaving Jack as a single father with 3 children aged 6, 4, and 2. It was not easy, but with the help of relatives, Jack managed to raise the younger generation successfully. After finishing school, the sisters remained inseparable. They attended college together, had a lot of fun and attended parties like other young people. They often made impromptu trips to meet old friends across the states. In 1980, Kathy decided to move to Arizona to study in nursing school, and Cynthia decided to follow her 2 years later. Cynthia eventually received a master's degree in public health and began a career as a nutritionist. In 1983, at the age of 25, she was offered a breakthrough opportunity to head a health center in a large Minnesota corporation and decided to take advantage of it. Having to move thousands of kilometers away from her sister to gain experience in her career, she soon grew tired of loneliness. In 1986, Cynthia decided to move back and settled in an apartment near her sister. Cynthia was a vibrant and attractive woman, always the center of attention. She had many suitors. In the first month after moving back, she met Mark, a DJ at a radio station and a local celebrity. They started dating. They led an active lifestyle and had a lot of fun, but their relationship was full of ups and downs. Mark wanted to maintain his party lifestyle, while Cynthia was looking for something more stable and was ready to think about starting a family. In July, 29-year-old Cynthia suggested to her boyfriend that they break up. After the breakup, she grieved for some time and found it hard to cope with this difficult moment in her life. To unwind, She and her sister went on a short trip to the beach in California. Despite the separation, the two young people still had mutual feelings for each other. On October 8th, at a party in a popular local club, Cynthia met two brothers, Michael Apelt and Rudy Alfred Apelt, who were both tall, attractive guys from Germany. Cynthia immediately felt a mutual attraction, Kathy realizing that her sister was head over heels in love. Michael was the youngest of 7 siblings, 5 years younger than Cynthia. The young people spoke English poorly, making communication quite difficult. However, as Cynthia put it, they were on the same wavelength, so they understood each other perfectly without words. The next day, Cynthia could not talk about anyone else. When she went to have breakfast with her sister, she even mentioned that Michael had said several times he was ready to marry her. Kathy was very skeptical about such a bold statement right after their first meeting, but Cynthia calmed her down, saying it was just the best way to forget about the failed relationship with Mark. Her friend Annette, who had gone to the club with them, met Rudy, and the whole group started going on double dates. Gradually, the couples began more serious relationships. Only a week passed before Rudy moved in alongside Michael, who also moved in with Cynthia. Everything happened so quickly that Kathy was amazed at the changes in her sister's life. She considered these hasty decisions would not lead to anything good. The relationship continued until December 17th when Cynthia and her boyfriend attended a friend's wedding. There, Kathy noticed a wedding ring on Cynthia's finger. It turned out she had already married Michael. Later, Cynthia confessed to her sister that it happened on October 28th, just 3 weeks after they met. Kathy was shocked by such a rapid change in Cynthia's behavior. For the first time, she was keeping a secret from her sister. Now, they found Cynthia's lifeless body. Detectives analyzed the scant evidence collected after her body was discovered, including tire tracks left in the desert sand. It was clear she had been taken there intentionally to be dealt with and abandoned in a deserted place. The criminal likely expected they would never find her. However, he made a mistake, and some people accidentally discovered Cynthia. Having learned the story of the last months of the victim's life, detectives suspected that either a stormy affair with the new guy or the abandoned boyfriend could be responsible for this brutality. The degree of cruelty indicated that it was something very personal. In addition to the tire tread prints, they found several traces, including a piece of nylon cord and a blood-soaked beach towel. Detectives continued to communicate with the close circle of Cynthia and analyzed her acquaintances. A few weeks before the breakup, Cynthia learned that one of Mark's ex-girlfriends had been found dead. The investigation into this crime by the Supreme Court was still ongoing by that time. Cynthia knew that Mark was trying to get back together with her. They had only spoken 3 days before the tragedy. There had been a verbal altercation when Cynthia admitted she had married someone else. She managed to resolve the conflict, but Mark said he was going to come to town for Christmas and suggested that Cynthia meet him. Cynthia did not come to the party organized before leaving, and no one answered the calls. When morning came, Michael called Kathy, shouting into the phone, trying to understand where his wife was. It was obvious that he was drunk. Kathy tried to extract some information from him about when he last saw her sister. When know that Cynthia was supposed to meet with Mark. At this time, Kathy assumed her sister might have run away with her ex. Kathy arrived at Cynthia's apartment, hoping to find some information about her, but found nothing. The only people against whom suspicions remained were Mark and current husband, Michael. Cynthia's photo was all over the news, and her relatives received a letter sent by her on the eve of the planned trip. It looked creepy because they already knew about her death. In this letter, she discussed her relationship with her husband. She expressed a desire for them to all meet and get to know each other properly. They couldn't communicate immediately with Michael due to the language barrier. However, on the day Cynthia's relatives learned about her death, one of the detectives from the police department was sent to talk to Michael. He was inexperienced in dealing with murders and brutal crimes, but he was chosen because he spoke German fluently. Michael opened up extensively and was amazed to find someone in the police department who spoke German. The detective was most interested in the chronology of events, particularly Cynthia's and Michael's movements on that fateful day, December 23rd. As it turned out, Michael became tense from the very beginning but managed to recount the events. According to him, Cynthia's car needed maintenance, so they took her car to the dealer for repairs. After that, they rented a car to return to the apartment. On the day of the incident, Cynthia was busy preparing for the trip and mentioned planning to meet friends around 10 p.m. Michael claimed that around 7 p.m., while he was taking a shower, he heard his wife talking on the phone. He noted it was a very aggressive emotional discussion, but he had no idea who was on the other end of the line since he couldn't make out most of the words, or even the names. After Cynthia hung up, she yelled that something needed to be taken care of and left without providing any explanation. While her husband was still in the shower, Cynthia took her luggage, purse, and went to meet her friends. Michael willingly cooperated with the authorities, allowing detectives to search his apartment and car. In addition, he provided a receipt from a restaurant dated the same day, on December 23, 1988. When the police listened to the answering machine recordings, one in particular attracted their attention. At 10 a.m., Mark called, said he had seen a girl resembling Cynthia in the news reports and had heard that she was missing. Worried about her, he asked to call back to confirm if everything was okay. Considering that he was in another state, it seemed strange that Mark had managed to see the news reports so quickly. According to the detectives' calculations, during this period, they barely appeared on screens, making it doubtful as if Mark was trying to clear himself out of spite. Ironically, due to his limited knowledge of English, Michael did not yet realize that his wife had died. When Michael, Rudy, and Annette were taken to the police station, they reported what had happened. Michael was very emotional, crying and even screaming as he tried to understand why this had happened. However, after that, all three were taken to different rooms for independent interrogations. Shoe prints were checked, hair and blood samples were collected from all three. At the same time, their alibis were confirmed. After that, all three were released, as they seemed unlikely suspects. Questions remained only regarding Mark, who was behaving suspiciously. The investigator leading this case flew to California to talk to the radio DJ. During this time, Cynthia's phone in Illinois received multiple calls, and the caller left numerous messages on the answering machine, supposedly trying to figure out what was going on. The detective found that Mark had been working on the day of the murder. After his shift, he rented a car, went to Los Angeles to spend Christmas with his mother and sister. Much to the surprise of the law enforcement officer, his alibi was confirmed. He could not have been Cynthia's killer. Cynthia's burial was scheduled for December 31, 1988. During the funeral, when the floor was given to Michael, he could not even utter a word. He had an emotional breakdown. He just stood there crying until his brother, Rudy, pulled him off the podium. However, when everyone was driving around after the funeral ceremony, Kathy drove past the car in which the brothers were sitting and saw them laughing with Annette. This seemed strange. Now it looked as if Michael had been pretending to grieve the whole time. Kathy informed the detectives about her doubts regarding Michael, after which the law enforcement officers decided to interview all the suspects in the case again, as something didn't add up. The first one at the police station was Kathy, who provided more details about the love story that preceded the crime. Now, it seemed to the investigators that the brothers from Germany were suspiciously secretive about everything. They avoided sharing details about their work, tried not to specify unnecessary information about themselves and their past. Kathy recalled that a few days after meeting them, she saw them going to the cheapest motel in town, despite their previous claims of staying at the most expensive motel and being involved in banking activities. She could even swear that after their first visit to her apartment, she lost $100 in cash. Initially, she convinced herself that it couldn't have happened because of them, but now she had significant doubts. The brothers had too flashy an appearance, creating the illusion of wealthy young people. After a couple of weeks of dating, they concocted a ridiculous story about being fired from the bank. Practically forced the girls to let them live with them, claiming they were waiting for something and would return to luxury later. Another oddity was the need to keep information about Cynthia's marriage a secret. Just a week after moving in with her, Michael stated he would have to return to Germany if they did not marry soon, as he would be deported. This provided the reason for such a hasty and secret wedding ceremony in Las Vegas, painting a more sinister and plausible picture. It seemed that, taking advantage of Cynthia's feelings, Michael forced his new girlfriend into marriage. Detectives tried to track down the brothers' history and were able to find several women they had met after arriving from Germany. It turned out that Cynthia was not the only one they had proposed marriage to. While it seemed that everything was going well for Cynthia and Michael compared to previous attempts, their very existence appeared suspicious. When Cynthia's diary was found, the last entry was dated November 11th. It sounded like Cynthia trying to convince herself of her husband's sincerity. No evidence was found that could connect the brothers or other acquaintances in the victim's close circle. Detectives even discovered a car rented on the day of Cynthia's death, but the tire prints did not match the tread pattern found at the crime scene. The interior of the brothers' car was also checked with analysis, but this yielded nothing. Unexpectedly, on January 3rd, Michael contacted the only German-speaking detective and reported that, after returning to the apartment following his wife's funeral, he had heard a suspicious message on the answering machine. Michael believed it contained some kind of threat but could not fully translate it, so he asked the officer for help. On January 4th, he came to the police station with the recording. It turned out that someone had indeed threatened to kill all his loved ones and himself if certain items were not received. The caller confessed to cutting Cynthia's throat with a knife, but it was unclear what items were being discussed. Detectives immediately noticed that the words were pronounced with errors and seemed feigned, as if the person was reading from a script. The text contained distortions that were uncharacteristic of English, and when it was literally translated into German, the text sounded much more coherent. The detectives feigned concern, but suspicions against Michael, Rudy, Annette began to emerge and strengthen. Where this group lived, 24-hour surveillance was in place. On January 5th, police officers monitoring the apartment complex observed them at 5:30 p.m. At 8:30 p.m., a secret agent knocked on the door. The law enforcement officer was in civilian clothes and pretended to have the wrong door. In fact, he wanted to confirm who was in the apartment and ensured that they were suspects. Interestingly, immediately after this visit, Michael reported that two black individuals had threatened him on his doorstep. He was not caught in a lie. Instead, they were invited to the station the next day to create a composite sketch of these fictitious dark-skinned men. Michael was interrogated for several hours while the rest of his group waited. The detectives deliberately prolonged the process and closely observed them to see the first signs that the criminal's will was beginning to break. Annette was the first to give in. Although she did not confess for quite some time, one of the detectives began showing her photos of the mutilated victims. Michael and Rudy were seeking citizenship, so Annette was involved to maintain communication since the brothers practically did not speak English, only Michael could communicate somewhat. They tried several schemes to introduce themselves, either as manufacturers of surfboards or as importers of German cars. According to the same story, they met Cynthia. For several months, they lived in a cheap motel, deceiving many women who succumbed to their looks and charm as man escort. This allowed them to receive money from these women for a living, but they were waiting for something more. Annette did not admit to the murder or even that it was planned. However, it was clear that her relationship with Cynthia had been based solely on a desire for profit. After they began living together and got married, Cynthia worked 2 jobs while Michael spent money recklessly, claiming he was waiting for the unblocking of accounts in Germany. From October to December, he managed to spend more than $4,000 from his girlfriend's wallet. After obtaining this confession, the detectives pressured Annette, threatening that she would be charged with murder if she did not tell the truth. She confessed that Michael had developed a taste for the good life and wanted more money, after which he devised a larger plan. On November 7th, he convinced his wife Cynthia to contact an insurance agent and take out life insurance policies for $1 million on each other. The beneficiary of her policy was, of course, Michael. He continued to feed her false statements, saying that their accounts in Germany were frozen, but that he would soon have access to them, making life insurance essential for them. Cynthia blindly trusted her husband due to her feelings. The insurance agent approved the policy, but it was not for $1 million, it was for $400,000. Without hesitation, Cynthia wrote out a check. After that, the brothers began to plan their expenses in anticipation of receiving the money. They even drew up a purchase and sale agreement for 2 Jaguar cars worth $144,000 each and 2 Toyota cars, each worth $66,000. They were also looking for expensive items, fully aware that in order to obtain all this luxury, they would have to kill. Cynthia's life insurance policy went into effect just a day before her death, and the insurance amount was even increased to $800,000. By this time, the brothers had already rented a car in which they planned to take Cynthia to the desert and kill her. On the day of the crime, Michael and Rudy took Cynthia to the desert, then lured her out of the car and brutally handled her. Annette was even in the car. According to her, it took the brothers about 5 minutes to stab the innocent victim. When they returned, both were covered in blood from head to toe. They changed their clothes and washed the blood off their skin to avoid staining the car. After getting rid of all the evidence, they returned the rented car and went to a luxury restaurant to celebrate their victory. Everything seemed to go according to plan, and it was supposed to be the perfect murder that promised great riches, except that Cynthia's body was quickly found. The plan began to crumble before their eyes. Was Cynthia their first murder victim? To answer these questions, detectives contacted colleagues in Germany to uncover the truth about the brothers' dark past. They found that Michael did not have any blocked accounts containing large sums of money, nor did he own any estate in Germany. In reality, he was a laborer with a criminal past that included convictions for burglary and assault. His brother Rudy had served time in a German prison for abuse. Due to their criminal history, connections to other possible crimes in the USA could not be found, indicating that perhaps Cynthia was their first and only victim. There was only one perplexing question left. Why did the tire tracks of the car used to transport the victim not match the tracks that were found? It turned out that Michael had anticipated this. On the day of the tragedy, he drove in such a way that it damaged the tread on the tires. When he returned the rented car, the tires had to be replaced. The person who provided the car for rent helped the police realize that it was true. In order to leave sinister messages with threats, they used a random homeless man on the streets of Los Angeles. After Cynthia's funeral, he was paid to call the specified phone number and read a text from a sheet. Annette was offered immunity from prosecution in exchange for testifying against Michael and Rudy. She agreed. A thorough search was conducted of the apartment where Cynthia and Michael lived, leading to the discovery of a pair of shoes whose soles matched the footprints found at the crime scene, which confirmed Michael and Rudy's guilt. During the imprisonment of the individual involved, notes containing incriminating information were found and used against them. At the trial, the most reckless act was Michael's decision to speak in his own defense. Even his lawyers tried to dissuade him, but to no avail. He thought he was smarter than everyone else. His confidence worked against him, as he made several contradictory confessions that only convinced the jury of his guilt. Michael and Rudy made a desperate attempt to shift the blame onto Annette, but this also failed. August 10, 1990, the jury found Michael Apelt and Rudy Alfred Apelt guilty of first-degree murder. Both brothers were sentenced to death. However, in 2009, Rudy's sentence was overturned because an IQ test showed that he was mentally disabled. His sentence was commuted to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. After 25 years, Rudy applied for parole in 2017. At the commission meeting, a letter was read from Kathy, who recalled that it was Rudy who inflicted most of the knife wounds on Cynthia and slit her throat. Kathy was convinced that such a man was dangerous and should not be released. As a result, his petition was denied. On April 26, 2022, 52-year-old Rudy died behind bars. Michael's sentence has not changed. He remains on death row awaiting execution. His defense is deliberately delaying the execution appeal, prolonging his life. Cynthia's death was so devastating that it prevented Kathy from trusting men and people in general. She did not marry until she was 50 years old. The murder of Cynthia Monkman cannot be called a crime of passion. It was a cold calculation by sociopaths for whom human life became merely a tool for achieving material goals. Insurance companies, in their attempt to increase profits by selling high-value policies, unwittingly created the conditions for murder by providing the criminals with a financial motive. Evidence indicates that the Apelt brothers would not have killed Cynthia if her life had not been insured. They probably would have turned their attention to another victim.
In a Minnesota town where life seems peaceful, a young couple seems to be the perfect example of faith and devotion. Yevgeny and Lyuba Savinok were known for their discipline, strong church ties, and loving image to everyone around them. They looked like the ideal Christian family, but behind their warm smiles and Sunday prayers, a much darker reality existed, one that few would dare to imagine. The danger in Lyuba's life didn't come from a stranger. It lived within her own home, hidden behind the mask of love. Then, on a spring morning in 2016, inside the home she thought kept her safe, years of fear and false hope exploded into a tragedy so horrific it shattered the entire community. This story goes beyond a single marriage. It is about missed warnings, a stolen life, a broken family, and a system that believed an abuser could change until it was far too late. What really happened in the Savinok home? How did a loving husband become a calculated killer? And why were the signs ignored? The truth of this case reveals not only how one woman was lost, but also how many others remain unprotected in silence. Yevgeny Savinok was born in 1986 in Russia into a family of 9 children. His father was raised in a strict religious environment, deeply influenced by his grandfather, who had secretly served as a priest during the Soviet era. Because of this, the grandfather was arrested and imprisoned for several years. After his release, the family decided to leave Russia and immigrate to the United States, seeking religious freedom and a peaceful life. The Savinoks settled in Wilton, a small town in Minnesota, where they began anew. The older siblings attended local schools, while the younger ones quickly assimilated into the American language and culture. During his high school years, Yevgeny excelled in academics and sports. He wrestled competitively, frequently won tournaments, and later became an assistant coach and sports instructor. Known for his punctuality, rule following, and active role in his church, he was considered a model young man. Lyuba was born in Estonia in 1993. Her family also immigrated to the United States when she was a child, settling just a few miles from Wilton. She grew up in a religious family that valued hard work and family values. She was a good student, gentle, and avoided conflict. After school, she worked at a local company, helped her parents, and attended church regularly with her family. That's where she met Yevgeny. They participated in church events and volunteer activities, and over time their friendship deepened into a romantic relationship. Their wedding was blessed by the church and attended by relatives from both sides. To everyone who knew them, their marriage seemed solid and loving. Yevgeny was seen as reliable and strong-minded, while Lyuba was gentle and devoted. At first, their marriage appeared harmonious. Their families and church community viewed them as an exemplary couple. However, behind the warm exterior, there were deep conflicts. The strict religious upbringing that emphasized male authority and female submission became the foundation of their relationship. These beliefs strongly influenced Yevgeny's behavior and put Lyuba under pressure, trying to maintain faith in her beloved husband. The reality of their marriage was far from the initial peaceful image. After only a few months, Lyuba realized that the relationship was based on control, not mutual respect. Yevgeny insisted that Lyuba should stay home, claiming it was for her own good. But in truth, he didn't allow her to go out without permission. He grew angry whenever she made independent decisions. Gradually, Lyuba lost contact with her friends, and visits from her parents dwindled. She lived under constant scrutiny. Her phone was checked, her interactions restricted, and even small delays or missed calls were treated as signs of betrayal. Yevgeny's jealousy and desire to control became more intense. Over time, his controlling behavior turned violent. Lyuba tried to hide her injuries, explaining them away as accidents. Her family noticed the bruises, but she insisted everything was fine. Eventually, she contacted the police several times, reporting abuse and expressing fear for her safety. Each time, after authorities intervened, Yevgeny apologized and promised to change. Relatives and church leaders often urged her to forgive him and keep the marriage intact. Lyuba continued to believe and hope that eventually he would truly change. In 2012, They had their first child, Matthew. A year later, their daughter, Vivian, it was born. Lyuba hoped that fatherhood would calm Yevgeny. For a short time after Matthew's birth, he seemed gentler, helping at home and spending time with the children. But soon, his behavior returned to how it used to be. Yevgeny began drinking heavily, and when drunk, he became volatile. Even minor issues could enrage him. He would yell, destroy things, and make threats, and later pretend nothing had happened. Whenever Lyuba sought help, he pressured her to stop, using the children as leverage. He warned that if she left him, their family would fall apart. Over time, fear became a constant part of Lyuba's life. Their house, which should have been a place of safety, turned into a space filled with uncertainty. No one ever knew when his next outburst would come. By 2014, the situation had worsened dramatically. Yevgeny no longer hid his dependence on alcohol. He came home late and angry, often for no clear reason. Family members reached out to the pastor, hoping his guidance might help, but nothing changed. Outwardly, the Savinok family still appeared to be a devoted church-going household. Behind closed doors, however, tension suffused everything. Lyuba tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for the children's sake, but deep down, she knew their old life was gone. When the stress became unbearable, Lyuba was forced to do what she had feared for years, seek help. After one of Yevgeny's outbursts, during which he yelled, threw objects, and pushed her to the ground while threatening her, she called emergency services. The police documented the incident, and a judge issued a temporary protective order barring Yevgeny from approaching her. For Lyuba, this was the first step toward freedom, but also the beginning of new pressures. A few days later, church representatives visited her. A deacon and the pastor urged her to resolve family matters privately. They spoke about patience, humility, and a wife's duty to forgive, suggesting that calling the authorities brought shame to the congregation. Although Lyuba tried to explain that she was worried about her and her children's safety, they only responded with words like, faith can heal, or a true wife saves her husband with love. During this time, Yevgeny called her daily, begging her to withdraw her complaint. At first, he promised to change, but soon his tone turned threatening. He warned her that if she did not drop the protective order, things would end badly. His threats became more specific. He said he would harm her and her family if she continued to disgrace him. Lyuba's parents pleaded with her not to see him, but their church leaders insisted that divorce was a sin. Feeling trapped between fear and religious pressure, Lyuba went to court and withdrew her statement. The police cautioned her it could put her in danger, but she feared both her husband's anger and her community's judgment. In their eyes, preserving the family was a duty, no matter the cost. Afterward, Yevgeny returned home. At first, he behaved calmly and seemed repentant, but it didn't last. The aggression soon returned. Each new incident made Lyuba lose more hope. When she turned to the pastor again, he told her that marriage is a test and that God never gives a person more than they can bear. These words shattered the last of her remaining faith. From then on, she stopped seeking help. She no longer called the police or confided in relatives. Every conflict began to feel unavoidable. The church that should have protected her only deepened her sense of isolation. Over time, she understood that any action she took without her husband's approval would be seen as defiance, and the little protection she once had disappeared entirely. By mid-2014, after another violent incident, Lyuba took her children and moved to her parents' house. The choice was painful, but fear had turned into exhaustion. With her family's support, she rented a small suburban home and began rebuilding her life. She found a job at a real estate company, a job that required her to interact with many people, but also allowed her, for the first time in years, to live a day without criticism or supervision. She took her children to school, spent time with her sister, and began to rediscover calm and happiness. Her family noticed her smile returning. She began to plan for the future, talking about stability and the desire for peace. Yevgeny saw Lyuba's departure as a betrayal. At first, He called, sent messages, and appeared at her home. When that didn't work, he changed approach, sending gifts through friends, attending her church, and asking the pastor to help reconcile them. He started what looked like a public attempt at redemption. He stopped drinking, got a job, and regularly attended church, telling everyone, including the children and Liuba, that he had been spiritually reborn. During visits, he brought candy and small presents, and spoke gently, and promised to regain her trust. His attitude shifted from pressure to persuasion. He wrote long letters of apology, claiming he was a changed man. The pastor and church members encouraged Liuba to forgive him, saying that God valued family unity. Even her parents, seeing his apparent transformation, hoped she might give him another chance for the children's sake. After months of hesitation, Liuba agreed to keep contact on a limited level. They began seeing each other again but still lived apart. Yevgeny was calm, respectful, and didn't interfere with her work. His behavior seemed proof of real change, and by the end of the year, Liuba decided to reconcile. In early 2015, Yevgeny moved back into Liuba's life. He appeared transformed, calm, sober, and helpful around the house. In public, he spoke of faith and forgiveness, admitting his past mistakes. To their family and church community, he seemed genuinely reformed. Tired from years of fear and loneliness, Liuba allowed herself to believe him. When he offered to move back in, she agreed. At first, life did feel peaceful. Yevgeny worked part-time, went to church regularly, and joined Liuba for Sunday services. The children were happy to have their father at home again. The house was calm, no yelling, no threats. Liuba started to believe their family could heal. In November 2015, she discovered she was pregnant with their third child. She saw it as a sign of a fresh start and trusted that things would truly be different. However, the peace didn't last. Within months, Yevgeny's behavior began to change. It started with small complaints: how Liuba spent money, who she spoke to, how she cared for the children. Then he turned controlling. He restricted her communication, forbade visits with friends, checked her phone, and accused her of disrespect. Arguments grew louder and more frequent. As their relationship unraveled, Yevgeny began drinking again. Liuba tried to stay calm and avoid conflict, but the tension kept building. In early 2016, one confrontation turned violent. Despite her pregnancy, he assaulted her. She went to the authorities and received medical care for bruises and internal bleeding that endangered the baby. That same day, Liuba was granted a protective order preventing Yevgeny from approaching her or the children. He was arrested and held in custody. During questioning, he denied the assault, calling it just an argument and insisting he never meant harm. He was later released on $3,000 bail, pending his trial, and temporarily living with his brother. Despite her family's concerns, Liuba allowed Yevgeny to see the children, as long as a relative supervised them. She believed a father should have the chance to be part of his children's lives, even under strict monitoring. However, Yevgeny used the opportunity to continue to pressure her, appearing to comply with the rules on the surface, but actually wanting to maintain their relationship. Although her family had warned her that even limited contact could be dangerous, she hoped this would help avoid further conflict. The pregnancy was difficult. After the attack, she needed rest, but constant stress wore her down. By spring, her physical health had improved somewhat, though emotionally she remained anxious. Those close to her knew the danger had not disappeared. It was simply quiet. Yevgeny waited for a chance to reassert control, and his release on bond effectively allowed him access to Liuba once more. The uneasy peace soon collapsed. Outwardly, the family seemed normal, but behind closed doors, tension was building toward another tragedy that no one could prevent. On the morning of May 16, 2016, Liuba's house on the outskirts of Wilton looked peaceful. The children played in the living room, while Liuba and her sister Elisa prepared breakfast in the kitchen. No one expected that the day would end in tragedy. Around 9 a.m., Yevgeny drove up to the house, saying that he wanted to see and play with the children. Lyuba agreed to let him in. However, Elisa immediately sensed that something was wrong. Yevgeny spoke slowly. His eyes were absent-minded. His gestures were awkward. He seemed drunk. However, Lyuba tried to keep calm and asked Elisa to let him play with the children in the yard. A few minutes later, Yevgeny returned inside. What began as a conversation turned into a heated argument. As voices rose, Elisa realized the situation was escalating. She stepped outside and called an ambulance, telling the dispatcher that her pregnant sister, Lyuba, was inside the house with a man who was behaving aggressively. While waiting for police, she heard shouting and then the sound of the door locking. She tried to get back inside but couldn't. Yevgeny had locked the house. Moments later, he emerged holding the children's hands and calmly led them to his car. Elisa ran to the neighbors for help. When police arrived, they forced the door open and found Lyuba. She had been brutally attacked, suffering 12 stab wounds, most to her chest and abdomen. She was in her final months of pregnancy. She was taken to the Baiji hospital, where doctors performed an emergency cesarean section to save the baby. However, the child only lived for a few minutes. That day ended a silent tragedy that had lasted for years. What seemed like a reconciliation turned out to be a pause in the face of an unimaginable tragedy, the death of a mother and her unborn child. Shortly after the attack, Yevgeny Savanok was arrested nearby. He was taken to the Wilton Police Department and then to the Beltrami County Jail. Within hours, he confessed. Investigators noted his calm demeanor. He didn't deny his actions and described them in detail. He admitted the attack was premeditated, planned over several months, driven by his inability to accept that Lyuba had left him. When asked about his motive, he said he felt betrayed and robbed of his family. He showed no real remorse, expressing regret only for how his actions affected the children. Psychological evaluations found him fully competent at the time of the crime, aware of his actions and in control of his behavior. He was charged with first-degree murder and the unlawful killing of an unborn child. The case against him included his confession, Elisa's eyewitness account, expert testimony, and autopsy results confirming that Lyuba died from 12 stab wounds to the chest and abdomen. The trial started in the fall of 2016. The Minnesota State Prosecutor requested a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Yevgeny's defense attorneys argued that he acted under emotional distress and attempted to have the charges reduced. The trial lasted several months, repeatedly delayed by defense motions for additional psychological and mental health evaluations. By early 2017, both sides began plea negotiations. In February, prosecutors offered a deal if Yevgeny Savanok pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and to the unlawful killing of an unborn child, and his life sentence without parole would be changed to a fixed 65-year prison term. Yevgeny agreed. On February 2, 2017, the Beltrami County District Court found him guilty on both counts and imposed the 65-year sentence in a high-security Minnesota prison. Under state law, good behavior and participation in work programs could reduce his time served by nearly half. During the hearing, Yevgeny accepted responsibility for his actions, but said he was not seeking forgiveness. The judge emphasized that the crime had been premeditated and deliberate, carried out with full awareness of its consequences. However, the court acknowledged his confession and cooperation, upholding the plea deal. Lyuba's family reacted with anger. Her brother, Alexander Katanek, called the verdict mercy for a murderer and a disgrace to the system. The family believed that someone who had taken the lives of a pregnant woman and her unborn child did not deserve the chance of a reduced sentence. To them, the plea deal was a legal compromise, not real justice. Prosecutors later explained that the agreement avoided a long, emotionally exhausting trial, protected witnesses' mental health, and secured a guaranteed conviction without risking appeal delays. After sentencing, Yevgeny was moved to the Oak Park Heights maximum security prison. His attorneys filed an appeal for a review of his confinement and a possible sentence reduction, but the court rejected it, leaving the original sentence in place. For Lyuba's family, the legal process was over, but their grief remained. They had lost a daughter, a sister, and a grandchild. No prison term could bring them peace or restore the lives taken by violence and misplaced faith that an abuser could change. After the tragedy, Elisa Savanach, the only witness, became both the key witness in the case and the emotional support for her family. Her testimony was crucial to the prosecution, but the trauma left lasting effects. She underwent long-term treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder and later became guardian of Liuba's children. Initially, Liuba's parents were given custody, but due to their health and age, full-time care proved difficult. With their consent, Elisa petitioned for and was granted legal guardianship, allowing the family to stay united. Together, they created a stable, loving home, determined that their future would not be defined by the past. Later that year, a vigil was held in Wilton. Friends, relatives, neighbors, and church members gathered outside the house where the tragedy occurred. They lit candles, prayed, and shared memories of Liuba and her unborn child. The vigil became more than a farewell. It served as a public reminder of the deadly consequences of ignoring domestic violence. After the investigation concluded, county police released a statement warning that lifting protective orders and trusting promises from individuals with a history of aggression can lead to devastating outcomes. The case received wide media attention and came to represent a broader societal issue: how fear, social pressure, and misplaced hope in an abuser's change can enable recurring violence. The Savanach family's story became a call to action. Advocacy groups used it to highlight the dangers of domestic abuse and to push for stronger victim protections and systemic reforms. Liuba's name became a symbol in campaigns demanding change and justice for survivors. For Elisa and her family, remembering Liuba has become a mission to speak out about what is often hidden. The tragedy may be over, but its effects still linger. It challenges us to think about society's responsibility in confronting violence. Why do fear and strict beliefs keep victims silent and bystanders inactive? In this story, faith, patience, and tradition slowly became a trap, where endurance blurred into surrender. Liuba will be remembered as a woman who just wanted a peaceful life. She loved her children, worked hard, tried to keep her home, and believed that kindness could move people. But that kindness did not save her, and instead left her with a painful lesson about the cost of silence and indifference. Now, 2 children grow up without their mother, a heartbreaking reminder that indifference can be as harmful as violence itself. The only way to break the cycle of fear is to speak out, seek help, and act before it is too late.
Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Julie Jensen. Mark Jensen was a successful man, a husband and father from the quiet, cozy town of Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin, USA, with a population of about 20,000 people. This typical suburb is safe, featuring many parks and walking trails. Mark worked as a broker, achieved success in this field. His career allowed him to provide a comfortable life for himself and his family. Additionally, he had quite flexible working conditions. Mark could take a vacation at any time, enjoying good privileges all thanks to his successful work. Mark was married to Julie, whom he met in 1981. They began dating in the spring of 1981 and then got married. Julie worked as a salesperson in a store. Their first child, named David, was born in 1990, and their second, Douglas, was born in 1995. After Douglas's birth, Julie decided to leave her job and become a housewife. Her husband's income was more than enough to provide for the entire family, allowing her to become an ideal mother for her boys. From the outside, their married life looked perfect. However, since 1991, they struggled with a serious problem that haunted Julie for the next 7 years. It began with an incident that felt like a bad joke. The first time she received someone else's candid photo stuck in her front door, no one paid any attention to it. However, similar incidents began to happen repeatedly, and later, emails with suspicious content appeared. Calls started coming to their home phone, but the unknown caller would simply remain silent and hang up after a few seconds. Checking the number was ineffective, as it could not be tracked. Julie tried to ignore the unpleasant episodes, sending the letters to spam and hanging up when the caller remained silent. But everything began to repeat itself in real life with frightening regularity, causing her anxiety and fear. It seemed that some unknown person was trying to intimidate her, penetrating deeper into her everyday life. Julie understood that the stalker was somewhere nearby. One day, she found that someone had moved all the garden furniture. Mark claimed that he had not done it. The most terrifying moment came when she walked out onto the porch one morning and saw a suspicious car parked across the road. As soon as she looked at it, the car took off and sped away. This experience frightened her and led her to develop paranoia. This behavior was repeated multiple times. Julie contacted the police, but in the small provincial area where they lived, there were not enough officers to fully address her problem. According to regulations in such situations, the case should have been transferred to a larger department specializing in harassment, but for some unknown reason, this did not happen. Probably, the authorities simply did not take her problem seriously. Frustrated, Mark decided to take the case into his own hands. Julie began to keep a journal in which she documented each incident in detail. This went on for several years. Finally, she approached the police with her journal and shared a story that had been kept quiet until then because it involved a very shameful episode. According to Julie, in 1991, she had a brief affair with an old colleague, name is Perry Tarika. They had a lot in common. He was going through a divorce at the time, and Julie was experiencing difficulties in her marriage, feeling distanced from Mark, whom she regarded more as a father figure. This distance led her to seek an outlet in a new relationship. The affair began as a friendship that developed into light flirting. One evening in 1991, Julie invited Perry over for dinner while Mark was on a business trip. After dinner, she offered him to stay the night. However, instead of the relief she expected, she felt an overwhelming sense of guilt, so much so that it suffocated her. Around this time, the harassment began. Julie also started visiting a psychologist, as she felt she was developing depression. She remembered that her mother had suffered from this illness and ultimately sank into alcoholism, so she wanted to avoid repeating that fate. The doctor diagnosed her with postpartum depression and prescribed antidepressants. After her visit to the doctor, she attempted to lift the burden of guilt by confessing her infidelity to Mark. Unfortunately, this did not help and only worsened the situation, leading Julie to file for divorce. Despite this, both spouses still hoped to maintain their relationship for the sake of their children. They even consulted a counselor, and Julie eventually withdrew her divorce application. Another problem remained: the stalking continued. Julie was convinced that this was the same Perry seeking revenge for their breakup. The detectives listened attentively to Julie's story. They accepted her application and promised to start an investigation. Contrary to Mark and Julie's expectations, however, the case never progressed. They decided to take matters into their own hands and hired a private detective, who quickly provided some interesting information. First of all, the detective discovered that Perry had moved to North Carolina during this period, almost 10 hours away from Wisconsin. Given how often the stalker appeared in Wisconsin, it seemed impossible for Perry to influence Julie while leading a normal life and working constantly. When he learned of the stalking, he even wrote her a letter expressing concern for her safety. Unfortunately, Julie didn't believe it. She still was convinced that the stalker was Perry. When she received the letter, she did not reply but instead took it to the police. Despite the detective's skepticism about Perry being the stalker, Julie and Mark continued to suspect him, especially after Perry learned about the stalking. The number of adult photos increased, and Mark became a victim of harassment multiple times. He also began to receive adult photos, which appeared everywhere he went, at his office, in his car, and even in a park. This had a very irritating effect on him, particularly because of the content of the images. Various photos depicted a man and a woman having intimate, but their faces were obscured. Mark endured this for a long time but eventually began to suspect the images might be of his wife. When he confronted Julie about this, they had a serious discussion. Despite her depressed state and overwhelming guilt, Julie insisted that the images were not hers. However, she began to believe that these photos might have been taken by Perry during a night they spent together. As a result, they turned to a private detective once again, determined to catch and punish the obsessive stalker. At that point, Mark figured out that these images most frequently appeared on Friday afternoons. He suggested setting up an ambush where the private detective could hide and watch for the stalker. Unfortunately, the plan failed as the stalker did not show up, seemingly aware of their scheme. The detective then decided to check Mark and Julie's phones. A tracking device was installed with the expectation that the couple would receive a silent call, allowing them to trace its origin. Amazingly, the calls stopped as soon as they set this up, leaving them perplexed. Concerned, they checked their home for wiretaps, but the detective found nothing. Julie financed this operation for several months and spent a great deal of money, but none of the tricks to catch the attacker were successful. The stalker disappeared, and they eventually relinquished the services of the private detective. Amid this turmoil, Julie's depressive state only worsened. She felt that because of her affair, her marriage could fall apart again. This cycle of anxiety and depression continued until December 1998. Julie was still struggling with her mental health when her prescription medication ran out, and she stopped taking the prescribed drugs. Around this time, she noticed a decline in her physical health. She felt weak, could barely walk and talk. She had difficulty thinking. The doctor prescribed her old antidepressants again and discussed her life problems. Even then, she still cried sporadically and felt guilty about her infidelity. Her depressive state lingered. But at least there was some relief in that the harassment had stopped. Everything they had done seemed to work. When the home phone was wiretapped, the calls ceased, and since the fall of 1998, she had not received any adult photographs. However, during this same period, Julie noticed some unpleasant changes. Beginning in August of that year, Mark started to treat her much colder. They had always spent a lot of time together, walking with their children, but now he increasingly made unpleasant comments towards her. It seemed that Mark was simply dissatisfied with everything, and he was not shy about expressing his discontent. Even in front of strangers, he exhibited behavior that overwhelmed his spouse. It was a bit strange. After 7 years of incessant persecution, Julie could finally engage fully in restoring the relationship. However, she felt more unhappy than ever. She told the therapist about her feelings during her appointment. At this time, she felt physically unwell, thinking she might be catching a cold from the children. 2 days later, on December 3, 1998, Mark took the children to school and returned home, where he found 40-year-old Julie in bed. She was lying under the blanket on her stomach, appearing as if she were sleeping. Her husband assumed she was not feeling well again due to depression and left her alone for a while. However, he experienced anxiety, so he later decided to check on her and noticed that she was not breathing. Mark confirmed his suspicions and immediately contacted the 911 emergency service. When the police arrived at Jensen House, Mark was visibly upset. He cried as he led everyone into the bedroom, where Julie lay under the blanket, unconscious. He believed she was dead, and after some time, it was impossible to resuscitate her. No wounds were found on her body. There were no signs of a struggle. There were no weapons or drugs nearby that could have been used to poison herself. It appeared her death was due to natural causes. Mark told the police that his wife had been unwell for several days prior. During this period, she had taken sleeping pills to fall asleep, rarely getting out of bed or even speaking. One arm was unnaturally bent beneath her body, suggesting that she could not have fallen asleep in such a position, leading to questions about why her husband left her in that state. In addition, Mark mentioned that she had recently resumed taking antidepressants prescribed by her doctor. He noted that several bottles were on the table, but they remained full. According to Mark, several of these drugs were new to Julie. He believed her illness and death were a result of a conflict between medications. He claimed that, in recent months, Julie had been struggling with a particularly severe stage of depression and, ultimately, could not cope, leading to suicide. However, there was no suicide note or anything similar in the bedroom, which seemed strange. Julie would not have ignored her sons and loved ones without leaving a farewell message. Mark willingly cooperated with the police, granting permission to search the house and the surrounding area. It was clear that Mark was very upset and simply wanted to understand what had happened. Soon, Mark's father arrived at the house, and the two men spoke alone. When they went outside, they were met by a crowd of locals who had gathered due to the commotion. Mark boldly declared that Julie died due to the incompatibility of the medications she had been actively taking lately. It seemed he was trying to calm the crowd, but the statement was too bold, as the investigation had just begun and any assumption needed to be proven or disproved, especially since no autopsy had been performed yet. Such confidence could arouse suspicion from the police. Immediately following these events, the relationship between Mark and Julie's family deteriorated. The reason was that Julie wanted to be buried with her relatives, but her husband insisted that her body, once examined, be cremated. Then they approached Mark with a request to arrange a memorial evening so that everyone who wished could say goodbye to Julie and share a portion of her ashes, but he simply refused to engage. There was much speculation about what happened to the ashes. Mark avoided the topic but later admitted that his son David scattered the ashes over the lake. This caused discontent among Julie's relatives and appeared questionable. When the toxicology report arrived, everything became even more confusing. In fact, Julie had not overdosed on any dangerous drugs. During the autopsy, the medical examiner found only one strange thing: Julie's facial bones looked somewhat deformed, as if they were not broken but on the verge of cracking. The medical examiner had never encountered anything like this before and could not confirm what it could be, but it all seemed suspicious. More valuable information emerged from their computer. It was discovered that Mark was the primary user. There were emails he had sent to one of his colleagues named Kelly Lobante. The letters turned out to be very personal, at times even intimate. Kelly was an assistant to management in the company, but in another city. It turned out that Mark had visited that city a couple of times for work from the middle of the summer, where he met Kelly. Kelly had just gotten married before meeting Mark, but that did not stop her from starting to date another man behind her spouse's back. Interestingly, the incident began in August, coinciding with the time Julie stopped receiving the adult photos, which was also when Mark seemed to be cold towards Julie. All this did not seem like a simple coincidence. In the browser history, there were more disturbing searches. Mark regularly made various requests concerning drugs and dangerous poisons, showing particular interest in antifreeze. The danger of antifreeze is that it is widely available, and even a relatively small dose can be fatal. Another problem is that it does not produce specific symptoms. It makes the person feel unwell, while they are actually being poisoned and gradually dying. Upon discovering the suspicious interest in Mark, a decision was made to test Julie's preserved blood sample for antifreeze. The detectives conducted a specialized analysis and were able to find small traces of the substance, but only traces. They considered this a very important finding. If Julie had wanted to voluntarily leave this life, she would have obviously consumed a larger quantity of antifreeze so that the result would indicate a 100% lethal dose, which would have killed her immediately. The fact that there were only small traces of antifreeze indicated that she may have been methodically poisoned over a long period. Additionally, the substance was not found in the bedroom or anywhere else in the house, suggesting that the victim could not have ingested it by accident. A computer scan revealed that on the morning of her death, Mark had made alarming searches regarding antifreeze. After he read the information, he immediately cleared the search history, apparently trying to cover his tracks. However, he likely was not aware that this could be recovered. All suspicions fell on Mark, especially since his wife was bedridden due to severe depression and their children were too young to use the computer on their own. There was only one person left who could have made those troubling requests. When communicating with the police, Mark stated that on December 3rd, the day Julie died, he had a strong desire to call an ambulance due to his wife's condition, but Julie insisted that he not do so. He interpreted this as a direct order, believing her desire to part with life was voluntary. Mark underestimated the situation, choosing to listen to his wife. Results from several examinations established that the cause of death for Julie was not straightforward. Upon detailed investigation, it was revealed that her nose had become so deformed it was almost broken, likely indicating that Mark had used a pillow to suffocate her by pressing it against her face until she could no longer breathe. Unfortunately, there was no material evidence directly linking him to the murder. Everything remained as mere speculation supported by circumstantial evidence. Suddenly, a friend of Julie brought a letter to the police station that Julie had written and given to her a few days before her death. In this letter, Julie stated that if anything happened to her, her husband should be blamed. It served as a detailed account of their troubled marriage. She expressed regret for a short affair with a man named Perry and proudly stated that she did not become an alcoholic like her mother, despite Mark's attempts to influence her. Julie detailed the medications she was taking and emphasized that she would never take her own life, especially for her children, whom she loved more than anything in the world. Her friend mentioned that Julie had previously voiced her suspicion that her husband wanted to kill her, and she had suggested going to a women's shelter. Although Julie considered this option seriously to protect herself and her children, she ultimately decided against it, fearing that Mark would find her, try to take the boys away. During this period, Julie communicated multiple times, even with acquaintances. She willingly shared her story, seemingly spreading information deliberately so that, if something happened to her, the police would have clear indications of the culprit, her husband. When speaking with Mark, the detectives did not reveal that they had information regarding his affair. So he lied, claiming that Kelly was merely a colleague. However, under pressure, he quickly admitted that he had met with her several times. Curiously, just a few days after Julie's death, Kelly left her husband and moved in with Mark. He fully financed her, supported her. Against this backdrop, Mark's lie seemed strange. The detectives continued to question the main suspect, but he denied almost everything. Finally, after hours of interrogation, Mark confessed, not to murder but to something else. According to him, although he was not the initial pursuer of Julie, and this suspicious man quickly backed off. Mark had kept numerous adult photos he had collected during that period. When he disapproved of his wife's actions, he staged a persecution to make her feel guilty and ashamed. He claimed he never intended to bring her to a tragic end. After 4 hours of interrogation, the police had no grounds for arrest, so they simply let Mark go. Several months passed. The newly minted couple, Kelly and Mark, continued living together. Mark launched a successful construction business. In March 2002, he proposed to Kelly, who accepted. They even placed an engagement announcement in the newspaper. More than a year had passed since Julie's death, and the investigation remained ongoing. However, the authorities were never able to find any direct evidence against the main suspect, Mark Jensen, who was arrested only in March 2002 on suspicion of first-degree murder. He had enough money to hire a good lawyer and post bail of $500,000. After that, he was released and returned to his normal life while the police continued to look for new evidence to send him to jail. Contrary to the expectations of Julie's family, this led to the charges being dropped. The children were small when their mother died, and by this time, they had even begun to call Mark's new wife his mom. The boys were in school, and Kelly became pregnant. After this, it seemed that Julie was simply forgotten. Her case became another unsolved mystery. Unexpectedly, 8 years after Julie's death, a new witness emerged, Ed Klug, who had worked with Mark about a month before Julie's death. They attended a business conference, got to talking, and later went to a bar for drinks. There, Mark drank too much and, overwhelmed with emotions, admitted that his marriage was not as good as he wanted it to be. He even said that he hated Julie and wanted her dead. Mark confided that you could poison your spouse with Benadryl, pool chemicals, or ethylene glycol. Based on this testimony, the police had the opportunity to arrest Mark again. This time, bail was set at $2 million. Although Mark's accounts contained more than $1 million, he did not have enough money to post bail and remained behind bars until January 2008 when the trial began. According to toxicological examinations, it was determined that Julie had undergone 3 stages of antifreeze poisoning. Mark had searched for information online many times, including on the very day his wife died. According to the prosecutor's office, he was never able to forgive Julie for her betrayal despite her repentance. he tormented her for a long time and enjoyed her suffering. He decided to finally get rid of her when his affair with Kelly began. Mark's defense attorney insisted that Julie drank the antifreeze herself to voluntarily end her life, claiming that the note she wrote before her death was designed to frame him, whom she had hated for many years. The hearings lasted 7 weeks, after which the jury needed days to decide on the outcome of the trial. Mark Jensen was found guilty of first-degree murder. He burst into tears when sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His lawyer immediately began fighting for his freedom by filing appeals, which worked. A federal judge overturned the conviction and ordered his release from prison. Agreeing with the lawyer's argument that the prosecutor's use of his late wife's words violated his constitutional, as his wife could not testify due to her death. The last trial began in January 2023. The defense successfully ensured that the note given to the police by the victim's friend was not used as evidence of guilt, which was a significant blow to the prosecution, as much of their case was built around it. Mark clearly tried to justify himself in every way possible and even became a victim of fraud during this process. His cellmate offered to testify for $1,000. Mark confided in one of his cellmates about his troubled marriage. He admitted to initially giving his wife antifreeze and described how he ultimately forced her to drink it for the last time on December 3, 1998. He went to bed with his wife. Julie Jensen was suffocating. He just lay there and watched her suffer. He then calmly took the children to school but was outraged that Julie never died while he was away, so he took a pillow, turned her onto her back, which caused her hand to assume an unnatural position, pressed the pillow against her face, nearly breaking her facial bones. According to his cellmate, Mark had been poisoning his wife by administering antifreeze in small doses over time. Even Kelly testified against him at the retrial. She was no longer the wife of the killer, having divorced about a year after his arrest, but she raised his 3 children. Interestingly, it became clear who had been persecuting Julie all those years: her husband. He had found out about her betrayal from the beginning and wanted to torture her, relishing in her suffering. Investigators found a fake email with explicit photos of other people that Mark had sent to himself while changing the sender's name to create the impression that someone else had sent it. This sophisticated, long-term torture was calculated, and he even skillfully portrayed himself as a victim. On April 14, 2023, Mark was again sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He remains behind bars.
Sarasota, Florida, a peaceful, safe, family-friendly city where life was calm and easygoing. But on November 7, 1997, that peace was torn away forever. Inside a suburban home, a brutal crime occurred that shocked the community. The victim was Sheila Belush, 35 years old. She was found dead, lying face down. Her right leg straight, her left bunt. Her lower face and chest bore fatal wounds. A haunting, bloody scene. But the most haunting detail was not the crime itself, but the children, not yet able to speak, crawling through their mother's blood, screaming in despair. Who was the killer? Why did he target Sheila? A devoted mother who loved her family dearly. Whoever the killer is, they have a clear objective: to kill Sheila. And what began as a seemingly enduring mystery soon unfolded into a shocking tale of betrayal, greed, and cold-blooded cruelty. Sheila Belush was born on October 19, 1962, in Topeka, Kansas. From a young age, she was known for her striking looks, and more importantly, her relentless determination. She never backed down from challenges, and people admired her resolve. After high school, she worked as a receptionist at a law firm, but her ambitions stretched far beyond the front desk. She dreamed of a life built on love, stability, and success. That dream seemed within reach when she met Alan, a man who appeared to be everything she wanted. Alan was attractive, polite, articulate, and charming. Their relationship moved quickly. After just 3 dates, he proposed, swept up in the romance. Sheila said yes. They married in 1982 and settled in Salem, Oregon. They soon had 2 daughters, Stevie and Daryl. From the outside, their life looked ideal. But Sheila didn't yet see the truth behind Alan's carefully crafted image. Born on June 5, 1955, in Eugene, Oregon, Alan had grown up with a single mother who was deeply unstable and violent. His childhood was brutal. His mother once beat him with a stick, breaking his cheekbone and fracturing his ribs. In another horrifying incident, she doused him with gasoline and tried to set him on fire. Those experiences left deep physical and emotional scars and helped shape him into a man driven by bitterness, deceit, and a need for control. Sheila believed she had married a dependable partner, but after the wedding, Alan's behavior told a different story. He was ambitious, but his ambition was fueled by greed. He planned to build a chain of electronics stores and created an impressive-looking business proposal, confident and persuasive. Alan took the plan to Sheila's father, Francis Anthony Walsh. Francis, impressed by his son-in-law's confidence, invested everything. His savings and even properties transferred into Alan's name, trusting the venture would grow the family's wealth. But all the promises quickly fell apart. Instead of investing, Alan spent lavishly, eating at fancy restaurants, buying expensive suits, living beyond his means. Within a year, the business failed. The Francis family went bankrupt. Their savings depleted. Sheila was devastated. She had trusted Alan, and he had ruined her family. Still, she stayed with him. Her loyalty gave him a chance to start over. The family moved to San Antonio, Texas, for a fresh start. There, Alan reinvented himself. Even changing his last name to Blackthorne, he launched a new business selling muscle stimulation devices at steep markups, targeting wealthy clients, especially doctors. He thrived. Charismatic and persuasive, he won over even skeptical buyers. In a short time, he rebuilt his fortune, indulging in luxury cars, designer shopping, and the lifestyle he'd always wanted. But the marriage was falling apart. Sheila could no longer ignore Alan's darker side. His need for control extended to their personal life, where his unusual demands for intimacy created growing tension. Sheila, the strong, determined woman who once loved Alan, begins to constantly think about escaping. Divorce shifted from a distant thought to her only path forward. Alan didn't seek intimacy. He sought domination, humiliation, and pain. He pursued elaborate, power-driven encounters with other women and demanded that Sheila watch. At first, she complied, hoping to save the marriage for her family's sake. But over time, the emotional strain became unbearable. The confident, vibrant woman, she had been faded into someone anxious, fearful, and deeply unhappy. Sheila eventually left the marital bedroom, unable to endure Alan's demands any longer. Her withdrawal enraged him, and the abuse escalated. What began as verbal cruelty turned violent. On one occasion, Alan forced her head into a toilet, attempting to drown her. On another, he beat her severely. Sheila reported these attacks to the police, not yet realizing that Alan had a history of similar abuse in past relationships. He had been married before, and both ex-wives suffered the same pattern of cruelty. In 1987, after 5 tumultuous years, Sheila reached her breaking point. They divorced, but the split launched a decade of legal warfare, custody battles over their daughters. Daryl and Stevie grew vicious, with each side accusing the other of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Even after both remarried, the hostility continued. In 1993, Sheila found happiness with salesman Jamie Belushi. They married and moved to Sarasota, Florida, hoping to escape Alan's toxic influence. 2 years later, Sheila gave birth to quadruplets. Sometimes it seemed as if the stormy past had receded into the distance. But Alan did not let go. Losing custody of his daughters infuriated him, And watching Sheila build a new life only deepened his obsession. He hires a private investigator to search for Sheila's family in Florida. Once he had their address, he began plotting revenge. He confides in Daniel Rocha, a golfing buddy, a petty criminal struggling to support his family, who admires his wealth and status. Daniel looked up to Alan and agreed to help. Alan lied, claiming Sheila was abusing their daughters and needed to be punished. At first, he said he just wanted to hit Sheila, but soon he changed his mind. He wanted to kill her. Daniel knew people who would take such a job. With $14,000, he found a hitman willing to act, Jose Luis del Toro. On November 7, 1997, Jose drove to Sarasota in a car borrowed from his grandmother. Along the way, he stopped at a sporting goods store to buy camouflage clothing and later at a gas station to ask for directions. Jose eventually arrived at Sheila's house. He broke in, waiting with a gun in his hand, watching her tend to her children. For a moment, he hesitated. Sheila didn't resemble the abuser Alan described. She looked like a devoted mother amid the chaos of toddlers. Doubt crept in, and he considered leaving until Sheila saw him and screamed. He fired reflexively. The .45 caliber bullet struck her in the face, and she collapsed on the kitchen floor. To ensure she was dead, he grabbed a knife from the counter, stabbed her, and fled. He left behind a horrific scene. 6 children, 4 of them infants, crying and crawling through their mother's blood. The investigation moved quickly once detectives found key evidence. Jose made a mistake. Biological traces at the scene provided forensic leads, and a vigilant neighbor had written down the license plate of a suspicious car, an act that proved crucial. Jose fled to Mexico, but authorities tracked him down. He was captured and deported to the United States. In July 1999, Jose Luis del Toro pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and armed burglary. He received 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. As investigators reconstructed the plot, more names surfaced through interrogations and court records. Jose's cousin, Sammy Gonzalez, cooperated with authorities and explained how the plan came together. He had recruited Jose for the killing, and his testimony implicated others. Court documents and subsequent guilty pleas revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Sammy Gonzalez ultimately pleaded guilty to solicitation of murder and was sentenced to 19 years in prison. But investigators didn't stop with the hired killer and the recruiter. Documents, witness statements, and evidence uncovered during the investigation led them to the man who had driven the plot, Alan Blackthorne, whose fixation on revenge set everything in motion. Alan consistently denied involvement, but the evidence told another story. Testimony described him as consumed by anger over his ex-wife Sheila's new life and the loss of custody of their children. Witnesses said he recruited acquaintances, promised money, and pushed for retaliation that escalated from threats to murder. Alan was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and domestic violence. Like Jose, he received 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole and was sent to a federal prison in Beaumont, Texas. Daniel Rocha, a friend and golfing partner who linked Alan with willing accomplices, was also ensnared. Described as a small-time criminal who admired Alan and needed money, Daniel was convicted for arranging the plot and received a life sentence without parole. The court determined the crime was not random but the result of a calculated conspiracy fueled by bitterness and ending in brutality. Throughout the trials, testimony revealed the motives and methods, offers of payment, promises of rewards, and discussions about killing Sheila so that they could transfer custody of the children. Witnesses recounted talks about money and logistics. While the profound loss suffered by the children remained at the heart of every proceeding, Sheila was murdered, leaving 6 young children and a grieving family. Alan's motive was stark and toxic: rage, humiliation, and the need to control. After Sheila divorced him, won custody of their daughters, and built a new life in Florida with Jamie and their quadruplets, Alan saw her happiness as an unforgivable betrayal. He could not accept her independence or that she had moved on. In his mind, revenge was the only answer. For orchestrating the murder-for-hire plot, Alan received 2 life sentences without parole. Prison, however, did not end the turmoil. In 2001, he was attacked by a prison gang and barely survived, prompting authorities to transfer him for his safety. On November 18, 2014, at age 59, Allen died in federal custody. The cause of death was never publicly disclosed. The heaviest burden of his actions fell on Sheila's children. When Sheila was killed in 1997, her daughters with Allen, Stevie and Daryl, were just 13 and 11. Her 4 quadruplets with her second husband, Yamia Belush, are all just 2 years old. After her death, Jamie shouldered the enormous responsibility of raising all 6 children. With help from extended family, he worked to give them stability and guide them through the years of grief that followed. Over time, the children grew and found their own paths. Stevie, now in her late 30s, is noted for her strength and resilience, building a meaningful life and giving back through community work. Her story reflects perseverance. Daryl and the quadruplets have chosen privacy, focusing on healing away from public attention. Though Sheila's life ended in a senseless act of violence, those who knew her remember her warmth, kindness, and determination. She was a devoted mother who faced enormous challenges without wavering in her love for her children. Her legacy lives on in them, in their survival, growth, and resolve to move forward despite their unimaginable loss.